In the timeless depths of Middle-earth's ancient history, where starlight first touched the unmarked shores of Arda, and the music of creation still echoed through primordial valleys, there dwelt among the Maijar a spirit whose heart would come to beat in harmony with every growing thing beneath the sky. This was Aiwendil, whose name in the tongue of the Valar meant lover of birds, and though few in later ages would remember this celestial title, his essence would forever remain woven into the very fabric of the natural world. Long before the first sunrise painted the mountains of Valinor, when the two trees still cast their mingled light across the blessed realm, Aiwendil served faithfully in the gardens of Yavanna Kementari, she who was called the giver of fruits, queen of the earth, and protector of all things that grow. In those hallowed groves where every leaf held starlight and every flower sang with the voice of creation itself, Aiwendil learned the deep songs that could coax life from sleeping seeds, the gentle words that could heal wounded bark, and the patient wisdom required to understand the slow, profound thoughts of ancient trees. His days in Valinor passed like gentle seasons, unmarked by urgency or want, filled instead with the quiet satisfaction of tending to Yavanna's vast gardens where golden malon trees stretched their branches toward the light of Laurelin, and where silver flowers bloomed eternal in the radiance of Telperion. Here, surrounded by the endless beauty of the undying lands, Aiwendil might have remained forever, content in his service to the Earth Queen, listening to the whispered conversations of root and branch, learning the names of every creature that crept or crawled or took wing beneath the unmarred sky. But even in paradise, shadows were stirring. Across the vast darkness of the void, Melkor, who would become known as Morgoth, the Black Enemy, had begun his great corruption of Arda. His discord had already touched the music of creation, introducing themes of violence and decay that would echo through all the ages of the world. The Valar looked upon Middle-earth with growing concern, for there the children of Ilúvatar were awakening, and the Dark Lord's influence spread like a poison through the very foundations of the earth. It was in this time of mounting peril that the Valar made a decision that would reshape the destiny of Middle-earth. They would send emissaries to the mortal lands, beings of their own order who would take physical form and dwell among the peoples of Middle-earth as guides and guardians. These messengers would be known as the Istari, the wizards, and they would appear as old men, wise but not all-knowing, powerful but bound by the limitations of flesh, immortal spirits clothed in bodies that could grow weary and feel pain and know the weight of years. 5 were chosen for this great task, and among them was Aiwendil, though he would be known in Middle-earth by another name entirely. Yavanna herself spoke for her faithful servant, requesting that he be numbered among those who would go forth to protect her beloved growing things from the corruption that Sauron, Morgoth's greatest servant, would surely bring to the forests and fields of the mortal world. Her request was granted, for the Valar knew well that the natural world would need a defender, one who understood its deepest secrets and could speak with the voices of wind and water, leaf and stone. And so it was that Aiwendil took ship from the Grey Havens in the form of an old man, his hair and beard already touched with the brown of rich earth, his eyes holding the deep green wisdom of ancient forests. He wore robes the colour of autumn leaves and carried a staff carved from the wood of a tree that had grown in Yavanna's own garden, though few who saw it would recognize its celestial origin. Upon his shoulder often perched birds of many kinds, for they were drawn to him as iron to lodestone, sensing in him a kindred spirit who understood their songs and honored their freedom. The ship that bore him across the Sundering Seas carried also his fellow Istari, though their paths would diverge once they reached the shores of Middle-earth. There was Kurumo, who would become Saruman the White, leader of their order and keeper of devices and rings of power. There was Mithrandir, who would be called Gandalf the Grey, friend to the small and forgotten, enemy of darkness in all its forms. There were also the two blue wizards, Alatar and Palando, who would journey far into the east and pass beyond the knowledge of Western chronicles. Each carried within him a different aspect of the Valar's wisdom. Each would choose a different path through the long years that lay ahead. But it was Radagast, as Aiwendil came to be known in the common tongue, whose heart remained most purely aligned with his original nature. While his brothers concerned themselves with the affairs of kings and the movements of armies, while they walked in the halls of the mighty and counselled the wise, Radagast turned his steps toward the wild places of Middle-earth, seeking out the deep forests where the old magic still flowed strong, the hidden glades where ancient trees remembered the elder days, the secret valleys where creatures of legend still made their homes. In the vast wilderness of Rovanion, between the misty mountains and the sea of Rune, Radagast found a place that called to his spirit like a half-remembered song from the gardens of Yavanna. Here, in a land that would later be known as Mirkwood, though in those days it bore the fairer name of Greenwood the Great, he made his dwelling. The forest in that time was a realm of wonder, its paths dappled with golden sunlight, its clearings carpeted with flowers that bloomed in every season, its ancient oaks and beeches rising like cathedral pillars toward a canopy, so thick and green it seemed to hold the very essence of life itself. Here Radagast built his house, though it was unlike any dwelling that men or elves might construct. It grew from the earth itself, shaped by his will and the willing cooperation of root and branch. A living home that breathed with the rhythm of the forest, whose walls were woven from still-growing vines, whose roof was formed by the intertwining branches of mighty trees that had bent their heads together in welcome. Moss carpeted the floors, soft as the finest silk, and flowers bloomed eternal in the window spaces, never fading, never falling, sustained by the gentle magic that flowed from the brown wizard's presence. In this sanctuary, Radagast began the work that would occupy him for thousands of years, learning the languages of every creature that dwelt within his domain. He spoke with the great eagles that nested in the highest peaks, understanding their proud cries and their ancient grievances against the darkness that crept through the world. He conversed with the wise ravens who remembered the deeds of kings and the fall of cities, their black eyes bright with intelligence and memory. The thrushes brought him news from distant lands, their sweet songs carrying messages across hundreds of miles, while the robins and wrens whispered to him the small secrets of glade and grove. But it was not only with the birds that Radagast communed. The great bears of the mountains came to know him as a friend, sensing in him no threat to their cubs or their territory. The wolves of the deep forest, still free from the corruption that would later claim some of their kind, would pause in their hunting to greet him with respectful bows of their great heads. Even the smaller creatures, The rabbits and squirrels, the hedgehogs and mice recognized him as protector and ally, often gathering around his dwelling in numbers so great that the forest floor seemed to ripple with their movement. The trees themselves were perhaps his closest companions, for they alone could match his patience and his long perspective on the turning of the world. The great oaks told him stories of the elder days, when elves first walked beneath their branches, and the light of the two trees still shone, reflected in the eyes of the firstborn. The beeches whispered of the changing seasons across centuries, their smooth bark bearing the memory of countless springs and autumns. The ash trees shared their knowledge of deep roots and high branches, teaching him the secrets of growth and endurance, while the birches danced in the wind and laughed with voices like silver bells. Through all these friendships and conversations, Radagast began to understand his true purpose in Middle-earth. He was not merely a guardian of individual creatures, or even of single forests, but a protector of the great web of life itself, the intricate pattern of connection and dependence that bound all living things together in one vast, breathing tapestry. Every flower that bloomed fed the bees that pollinated the fruit trees, that fed the bears that scattered seeds in their wanderings, that grew into new forests that sheltered countless generations of creatures in an endless cycle of mutual support and care. This understanding filled him with a profound sense of responsibility and an equally deep peace. Here, in the heart of Greenwood the Great, surrounded by the countless voices of his beloved creatures, Radagast had found his calling and his home. The years flowed past him like a gentle river, marked not by the rise and fall of kingdoms, but by the slower rhythms of growth and rest, of birth and renewal, of the patient work of healing and protection that would occupy him through all the long ages of his watch over Middle-earth. As the centuries turned in their slow and stately dance, Radagast's understanding of his role deepened like roots finding their way to hidden springs. The wizard learned to read the subtle signs that spoke of imbalance in the great web of life, sensing when some thread had been pulled too tight, or when a portion of the pattern had begun to fray. He discovered that his healing touch extended beyond the mending of broken wings or the soothing of fevered brow, encompassing the restoration of entire ecosystems that had fallen into disharmony. When blight struck the berry bushes upon which so many creatures depended, Radagast would walk among them in the pre-dawn hours, his staff glowing with a gentle amber light that seemed to draw the sickness from leaf and stem. Where he passed, the plants would straighten and their leaves would brighten, as if touched by the first rays of spring sunlight after a long and bitter winter. The brown wizard's dwelling grew more wondrous with each passing year, though it remained humble in its essential nature. His simple cottage became overgrown with flowering vines that bloomed in impossible profusion, their blossoms opening in sequence throughout the seasons, so that there was never a time when colour and fragrance did not grace his threshold. The roof, thick with moss and small wildflowers, provided nesting sites for countless birds whose songs created a constant symphony of joy and contentment. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves carved from living wood that continued to grow even as they held his collection of seeds, pressed flowers, and small treasures brought to him by grateful animals. Crystals of various hues hung from the rafters, each one attuned to different aspects of nature's voice, chiming softly in harmonies that spoke of weather patterns, the health of distant groves, and the movements of migrating creatures across the vast expanses of Middle-earth. In these peaceful years, Radagast developed his gift for speaking with all manner of living things into an art of extraordinary subtlety and depth. He learned that each species had its own particular wisdom to offer, its own perspective on the great questions of existence. The ancient tortoises, moving slowly through the undergrowth with shells covered in moss and tiny ferns, carried memories that stretched back to the very founding of the forest. They spoke in voices like distant thunder, sharing tales of the first saplings that had grown into the mighty trees now towering overhead, and of the slow but inexorable changes that had shaped the land over millennia. The swift flying swallows brought news from far distant places, their chatter filled with reports of other forests, distant mountains, and the great sea that lay beyond the edge of the world. Even the earthworms in the rich soil beneath his feet had their stories to tell, speaking of the patient work of renewal that turned fallen leaves into fertile earth, death into life, ending into beginning. Through these countless conversations, Radagast began to perceive time itself differently than his fellow Istari, where Saruman measured years in terms of political developments and the rise and fall of kingdoms, and Gandalf marked the passage of time by the great events that shaped the fate of the free peoples. Radagast's calendar was written in the language of natural cycles. He knew the years by the patterns of acorn abundance that determined where the deer would winter, by the subtle shifts in bird migration routes that spoke of changes in distant climates, by the slow dance of predator and prey populations that kept the forest in its delicate balance. This deep attunement to natural time brought him a serenity that his more worldly colleagues could scarcely comprehend, a peace rooted in the understanding that all things, no matter how troubled they might seem in the moment, were part of a greater harmony that would ultimately prevail. The wizard's reputation spread gradually throughout the forest and beyond, carried by the creatures themselves who spoke of him in their own languages to their distant cousins. Migrating birds carried tales of the brown wizard to forests far to the north and south, where other guardians of the wild began to seek his counsel on matters of healing and protection. The great eagles, those noble servants of Manwë, who soared above the highest peaks, would sometimes descend to visit him, their keen eyes reflecting the wisdom of the wind and sky. In their piercing calls, Radagast heard news of the wider world, of the movements of dark creatures in distant mountains, of the gradual awakening of ancient evils that had long slumbered in the deep places of the earth. Yet even these troubling tidings could not disturb his fundamental tranquility, for he understood that darkness and light were both necessary parts of the great pattern, and that his role was not to prevent all shadow, but to ensure that life itself continued to flourish, even in the most difficult of times. As his power and wisdom grew, Radagast began to develop abilities that seemed almost miraculous to those who witnessed them. He could call rain to drought-stricken valleys, with songs that echoed the music of the spheres, his voice joining with those of the clouds themselves to bring the gift of water to thirsting roots. When forest fires threatened to consume vast stretches of woodland, he would walk directly into the flames, his brown robes somehow untouched by the heat, and speak words of cooling and calm that would turn the hungry fire into gentle warmth that encouraged new growth rather than destroying the old. wounded animals would travel great distances to seek his healing touch, and it was said that no creature, no matter how gravely injured, ever left his care without being made whole again. The other Istari, when they encountered him during their own journeys, often found themselves puzzled by the path their colleague had chosen. Saruman, resplendent in his white robes and accompanied by the trappings of power and authority, would look upon Radagast's simple garments and humble dwelling with poorly concealed disdain. The white wizard could not understand how one granted such authority, by the valor could content himself with the company of beasts and the tending of flowers, when there were great works to be accomplished, rings of power to be studied, and the movements of the Dark Lord to be countered with wisdom and strength. Gandalf, though more sympathetic to his colleague's chosen path, sometimes worried that Radagast was losing sight of the greater mission that had brought them all to Middle-earth, that his love of growing things might blind him to the approaching storm that would require all their combined efforts to weather. But Radagast, in his deep communion with the natural world, had come to understand something that his fellows had not yet grasped. The power of Sauron, terrible though it was, represented ultimately a force of corruption and destruction, a twisting of the natural order into shapes that served only domination and control. The truest opposition to such darkness lay not in matching it with equal force, but in nurturing and protecting the very things it sought to destroy. Every flower that bloomed under his care, every young animal that grew to healthy maturity under his protection, every forest glade that remained untouched by shadow, was itself a victory against the forces of corruption. In tending to these seemingly small things, Radagast was weaving a great spell of preservation and renewal that would prove, in the end, to be as vital to the salvation of Middle-earth as any sword or crown or ring of power. The seasons turned and turned again, and Radagast's understanding of his purpose deepened like roots seeking water in rich earth. He began to perceive the intricate web of connections that bound all living things together, how the health of a single tree could ripple outward to affect the well-being of creatures dwelling 100 leagues away, how the song of birds carried not merely melodies, but messages of warning and hope that travelled from forest to forest across vast distances. In learning to listen to these subtle communications, he became something more than a guardian of individual creatures and plants, evolving into a keeper of the great conversation that flowed eternally between all things that grew and breathed and moved under sun and stars. The birds in particular became his closest allies and most trusted messengers. Great eagles would descend from their mountain eyries to share news of distant lands, their keen eyes having observed the movements of armies and the stirring of ancient evils in places where no earthbound creature could venture. Ravens, wise and long-lived, brought him tales whispered in the courts of kings and the councils of the wise, their dark wings carrying secrets across the breadth of Middle-earth. Even the smallest wrens and sparrows became part of his network of watchers, their tiny hearts beating with fierce loyalty to the wizard who had shown them such gentle kindness. Through their eyes and voices, Radagast began to perceive the growing shadow that stretched its tendrils ever further from the dark tower of Barad-dûr, corrupting and poisoning wherever it touched. It was through the birds that he first learned of the strange sickness that had begun to creep through the great forest of Mirkwood, transforming its ancient paths into twisted mazes where light could not penetrate and wholesome creatures feared to tread. The trees themselves, those mighty beeches and oaks that had stood since the elder days, began to whisper of dreams filled with darkness and despair, their leaves turning sickly colours out of season, their bark weeping black tears that poisoned the very ground where they fell. Radagast felt this corruption as a physical pain in his own heart, for he had walked those forest paths in happier times, and knew each grove and glade as dear friends whose suffering called out to him across the miles. Setting aside his comfortable dwelling at Rhosgobel for a time, he ventured deep into the infected woodlands, moving carefully through shadows that seemed to reach toward him with grasping fingers. The animals he encountered there were changed, their eyes reflecting a wild fear that spoke of constant torment, their natural patterns of behavior twisted into forms of aggression and desperation that broke his heart to witness. Yet even in this place of growing darkness, his presence brought moments of peace and clarity, his gentle voice cutting through the confusion and pain to remind the suffering creatures of who they truly were beneath the shadow's influence. Working tirelessly through many seasons, Radagast began to weave protective enchantments around the edges of the corruption, creating sanctuaries where the darkness could not penetrate, safe havens where animals could rest and heal and remember the natural joy of simply being alive. These refuges became beacons of hope in the growing gloom, places where the ancient songs of the forest could still be heard, and where new growth could take root despite the surrounding decay. Though he could not heal all the wounds that the shadow had inflicted, he could prevent its spread into the healthy lands beyond, standing as a living barrier between the corruption and the innocent creatures who might otherwise fall victim to its influence. The work was exhausting and often heartbreaking, requiring him to witness suffering he was not always able to ease. But Radagast persevered with the patient determination of one who understands that even small acts of preservation and healing contribute to a greater pattern of renewal and hope. He learned to find strength in the gratitude of a deer whose fawn he had guided to safety, in the sweet song of a thrush whose nest he had protected from the creeping darkness, in the slow but steady recovery of a grove of saplings he had shielded with his power until they grew strong enough to resist the shadow on their own. During these long years of struggle against the growing corruption, Radagast's appearance began to change in subtle ways that reflected the depth of his communion with the natural world. His brown robes, already weathered by countless seasons spent outdoors, took on the colours and textures of earth and bark and moss, as if the very fabric had learned to mirror the forest around him. Small creatures began to make their homes about his person, field mice nesting in his deep pockets, tiny birds perching fearlessly on his shoulders and in his increasingly wild hair, beetles and butterflies treating his outstretched hands as safe landing places during their journeys. To those who encountered him during this period, he appeared less like a wizard in the traditional sense, and more like some ancient spirit of the woods made manifest in human form. This transformation did not escape the notice of his fellow Istari, particularly Saruman, whose own path was leading him toward an ever greater desire for order and control. When the two wizards met during a gathering of the White Council, Saruman's disapproval was plain to see in his carefully composed features and measured words. He spoke of the importance of maintaining dignity befitting their station, of the need to command respect from the peoples of Middle-earth who looked to the Istari for guidance and protection. How could Radagast hope to influence kings and lords and captains when he appeared before them covered in moss and trailing a retinue of woodland creatures, like some eccentric hermit who had lost touch with civilized society? But Radagast, listening to these criticisms with the same patient attention he gave to the concerns of his animal friends, felt no shame in the path he had chosen. The respect of kings and the approval of the mighty seemed small things indeed compared to the trust of a wounded hawk, or the grateful purring of a cat whose kittens he had helped deliver safely into the world. Power, he had come to understand, was not something to be grasped and wielded like a sword, but something to be shared freely, like sunlight falling equally on noble oak and humble fern, nourishing each according to its nature and need. As the years passed and the shadow continued to grow stronger, Radagast's role as a guardian and healer became ever more vital to the preservation of the free peoples and their lands. Though he seldom appeared in the great councils or the halls of power where momentous decisions were made, his quiet work created the conditions that made victory possible for those who would take up sword and banner in the final struggle against darkness. The birds he had befriended carried messages between scattered allies. The safe paths he had maintained through dangerous lands allowed crucial supplies and reinforcements to move unseen. The creatures he had healed and protected became the eyes and ears that watched for enemy movements in places where no spy could venture. In this way, the brown wizard wove his own thread into the great tapestry of events that would determine the fate of Middle-earth, his contribution as essential as any made by warrior or king, though perhaps less visible to those who measured importance by the clash of armies and the fall of fortresses. His was the power that kept hope alive in the darkest hours, the gentle strength that preserved the very things worth fighting for, when all seemed lost to shadow and despair. When the darkness finally lifted and the armies of the West had achieved their impossible victory, Radagast found himself standing once more in the forests of Rhosgobel, watching the first rays of dawn filter through leaves that seemed to shimmer with renewed life. The very air felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the world itself. The trees stood taller, their branches reaching toward the sky with a confidence that had been absent for so long, and the songs of birds carried further on the morning breeze, filled with melodies that spoke of joy rather than mere survival. In the days that followed, as news of the victory spread throughout Middle-earth, and celebrations began in the cities of men, Radagast received his own visitors in the quiet clearings of his woodland home. They came not with fanfare or ceremony, but quietly, one by one, as had always been their way with him. A family of deer emerged from the undergrowth, their young ones no longer trembling at every shadow, their eyes bright with curiosity rather than fear. An ancient badger, scarred from many battles against the servants of darkness, came to rest peacefully in the shade of Radagast's favourite oak, finally able to lay down the burden of constant vigilance. Even the ravens, those wise and sometimes troublesome messengers, arrived with tales not of danger and despair, but of new nestlings hatched in safety and young ones learning to fly without the threat of fell beasts haunting the skies above. The brown wizard welcomed them all with the same gentle patience he had always shown, listening to their stories of survival and loss, of small victories won in forgotten corners of the world where no chronicle would record their struggles. He tended to wounds that had been carried too long, both physical hurts and the deeper injuries that come from living too long in fear and shadow. With herbs gathered from secret places and words of healing learned in ages past, he helped them remember what it meant to live rather than merely endure. Some of the creatures who came to him had been changed by their long exposure to the darkness, their natural instincts twisted by the malice that had seeped into the very earth and water of certain regions. These required special care, for the corruption could not be simply healed away like a broken bone or infected wound. Instead, Radagast worked with infinite patience to help them rediscover their true nature, sitting with them through long nights as they struggled to remember what they had been before the shadow touched them, speaking to them in the old tongue that all living things understand in their deepest hearts. As spring turned to summer and summer to autumn, the wizard began to notice subtle changes in the land itself. The borders between the wild places and the cultivated fields, which had grown ever sharper during the long years of conflict as men retreated behind walls and hedgerows, began to soften once more. Wild flowers appeared along the edges of ploughed ground, not as invaders to be rooted out, but as welcome companions adding beauty and attracting the beneficial insects that helped crops flourish. Streams that had run muddy with the runoff from hastily built fortifications began to clear, their waters once again reflecting the sky and supporting the fish and water birds that had long been absent. The very stones seemed to settle more peacefully into the earth, no longer vibrating with the echo of marching armies and the thunder of siege engines. In this time of renewal, Radagast found himself thinking often of his fellow Istari and the different paths they had chosen in their long years in Middle-earth. Gandalf had departed with the ring-bearers, his mission completed and his time in the mortal lands at an end. Saruman had fallen to corruption and met his fate. A reminder of how even the wisest could lose their way when power became more important than service. The blue wizards remained a mystery, their fate unknown, but their absence deeply felt by one who understood the magnitude of the task they had all been given. Standing alone now among the Istari who remained in Middle-earth, Radagast felt no loneliness, for he had never truly been alone. His companions had always been the living things that shared the world with him, and they remained as constant as the turning of the seasons and the movement of the stars. Yet he could not help but wonder what his role would be in this new age that was dawning. The time of the elves was ending, and many of the ancient powers were departing across the sea to the undying lands. Men would inherit the earth, and with it the responsibility for its care and protection. Some among the race of men understood this duty, having learned wisdom from their association with the elves and the other elder peoples. But many more saw the natural world only as a resource to be exploited or an obstacle to be overcome. The forests that had stood since the elder days were already falling beneath the axes of those who sought timber for their expanding cities and clear land for their growing herds. Rivers were being diverted and dammed to serve the needs of mills and workshops, with little thought given to the countless creatures who depended on their natural flow. Radagast knew that his work was far from finished, that in some ways it was only beginning. The victory over the Dark Lord had removed the immediate threat of evil conquering all, but it had not solved the deeper challenge of how to live in harmony with the natural world. This was a lesson that would have to be taught over and over again to each new generation of men as they spread across Middle-earth and made it their own. The Brown Wizard understood that this teaching could not be done through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but only through the patient example of right living and the quiet influence of those who had learned to see the world as a living whole, rather than a collection of separate parts to be manipulated for individual gain. So he continued his work much as he always had, tending to the creatures who sought his help, maintaining the ancient paths through the wilderness and preserving the knowledge of herb lore and natural healing that might otherwise be lost as the world changed around him. But now he began to reach out more deliberately to those among men who showed an aptitude for understanding the deeper connections between all living things. These were often simple folk, farmers and foresters, hunters and healers, people whose daily lives brought them into close contact with the natural world, and who had learned to read its signs and respect its rhythms. To them, he offered guidance and encouragement, helping them to trust their instincts and deepen their knowledge, so that they in turn could teach others and keep alive the old wisdom in the new age that was coming. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing its own gifts and challenges, its own opportunities for growth and learning. Radagast watched the children of men grow to adulthood and have children of their own, saw kingdoms rise and prosper, witnessed the slow but steady spread of cities and roads across lands that had once known only the footsteps of wild creatures. Through it all, he remained a constant presence in the deep places of the world, a bridge between the ancient wisdom of the elder days and the emerging civilization of the younger races, ensuring that something essential would not be lost in the great changes that were reshaping Middle-earth. In his quiet way, the Brown Wizard had become exactly what he was meant to be, not a leader of armies or a counselor to kings, but a guardian of the living world and all the countless precious forms of life that called it home. The passage of time in the Fourth Age brought with it a gradual deepening of Radagast's understanding of his role in the changing world. As the dominion of men expanded and the last remnants of the elder days faded into memory, he found himself becoming something like a living repository of ancient knowledge, not merely of spells and lore, but of the deeper truths about how all life was interconnected in ways that the newer inhabitants of Middle-earth were only beginning to comprehend. His dwelling in the heart of the great forest had evolved over the centuries into something that was neither entirely wild nor wholly tamed, but rather a perfect synthesis of natural growth and gentle cultivation. Here, medicinal herbs grew in carefully tended plots alongside their wild cousins, and fruit trees that had been coaxed into greater abundance through patient care offered their bounty to any creature in need. The very clearing itself had become a sanctuary where the most timid of woodland animals would come to rest without fear, sensing in the Brown Wizard's presence a peace that ran deeper than the temporary absence of predators or hunters. It was in this sanctuary that Radagast began to perceive more clearly the subtle changes that were taking place in the fabric of Middle-earth itself. The departure of the elves had left gaps in the network of ancient power that had once flowed through sacred groves and hidden springs. And while the world was healing from the wounds of the great wars, it was also transforming in ways that would have profound implications for all who dwelt within it. The songs that had once maintained the deepest magics were growing fainter, not because they were being forgotten, but because the voices that had sung them with the greatest power and understanding were crossing the sea to the undying lands. In their absence, it fell to others to take up the burden of maintaining the delicate balance between the seen and unseen worlds. And Radagast understood that this responsibility would increasingly fall to the children of men, whether they realized it or not. This understanding brought with it both sorrow and hope. There was sorrow in watching the slow fading of wonders that had once seemed as eternal as the mountains themselves, in knowing that future generations would grow up in a world where magic was increasingly rare, and the voices of the firstborn would be heard only in distant memory. Yet there was hope as well, for he could see in the younger races a vitality and adaptability that the elves, for all their wisdom and beauty, had perhaps never possessed. Men, in particular, seemed capable of forming deep bonds with the natural world that, while different from the ancient relationships of the elder days, were no less real or meaningful. Their shorter lives gave them an urgency and intensity of experience that could lead to profound insights, and their capacity for change meant that they might yet learn to live in harmony with the world around them in ways that were uniquely their own. As the seasons turned and the years accumulated like fallen leaves, Radagast began to notice that his own nature was changing as well. The urgency that had once driven him to travel widely across Middle-earth was gradually giving way to a deeper understanding that his greatest service lay not in covering vast distances, but in maintaining the sanctuary he had created and allowing it to serve as a beacon for all who sought a different way of living. Travelers began to arrive at his door with increasing frequency, drawn by stories they had heard in distant villages, of a place where the old wisdom was still practiced, where healing could be found for ailments that no ordinary physician could cure, and where the boundary between the human and natural worlds seemed to dissolve in the most beneficial of ways. These visitors came from all walks of life and every corner of the known world. Some were scholars, seeking knowledge of herb lore and natural philosophy. Others were simple folk suffering from ailments of body or spirit that conventional healing had failed to address. There were young people who felt called to a life of service to the natural world, but lacked the guidance to know how to begin. And there were older individuals who had spent their lives in more conventional pursuits, but found themselves yearning for a deeper connection to something beyond the purely human realm. To each of these seekers, Radagast offered what help he could, though always in his characteristic manner of gentle suggestion rather than direct instruction, allowing each person to find their own path, while providing the wisdom and encouragement needed to stay true to that path once it was discovered. Through these encounters, the brown wizard began to see the emergence of what might be called a new tradition of earth wisdom, one that was rooted in the ancient knowledge he had preserved, but adapted to the needs and circumstances of the age of men. Those who spent time in his sanctuary and learned from his example carried that knowledge with them when they departed, establishing their own small centers of healing and natural learning in communities across Middle-earth. These were not grand institutions or formal schools, but rather quiet places where the old ways of understanding the relationship between all living things could be practiced and passed on to others who showed an interest and aptitude for such learning. The network that grew from these humble beginnings was unlike anything that had existed before in Middle-earth. It was not organized from above by any central authority, nor was it bound together by formal oaths or rigid doctrines. Instead, it was held together by shared values and a common understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with the natural world. Those who were part of this network recognized each other not by any outward sign or symbol, but by their approach to healing, their reverence for all forms of life, and their commitment to preserving and sharing the ancient wisdom that Radagast had helped them to discover. In time, these practitioners became known in their communities as wise women and cunning men, herbalists and healers, keepers of the old knowledge who could be trusted to help when conventional solutions failed, and who understood the deeper connections that bound all life together. As this network grew and flourished, Radagast found that his role was evolving once again. No longer was he simply a guardian of ancient wisdom or a healer of individual creatures in need. He had become something like a spiritual ancestor to an entire tradition of earth-based learning, a figure whose influence spread far beyond the boundaries of his forest sanctuary, even as he himself remained contentedly rooted in that one place. The knowledge he had preserved and the example he had set were taking on a life of their own, growing and adapting as they passed from teacher to student, from healer to patient, from one generation to the next. In this way, the wisdom of the elder days was not simply being preserved unchanged, but was being transformed and renewed, made relevant to the needs of a world that was itself constantly changing and growing. This transformation brought Radagast a deep sense of satisfaction, for he could see that his work was bearing fruit in ways that extended far beyond anything he could have accomplished through his own direct actions. The Fourth Age was indeed becoming the age of men, but it was an age in which the ancient wisdom had not been lost, but had instead found new forms of expression, new ways of flowering in the fertile soil of human hearts and minds that were open to the deeper truths of existence. The seasons continued their eternal dance around Radagast's sanctuary, and with each passing year, the wizard found himself drawn deeper into contemplation of the great patterns that governed all existence. He would spend long hours seated beneath the ancient oak that had become his favorite place for reflection, watching the interplay of light and shadow as the sun moved across the sky, feeling the subtle vibrations that ran through the earth beneath his feet, like the slow, steady heartbeat of the world itself. In these moments of profound stillness, he could sense the vast network of connections that linked every living thing, from the smallest beetle scurrying through the leaf litter to the mightiest eagle soaring high above the forest canopy. It was a web of relationships so intricate and beautiful that it took his breath away, and he understood with ever greater clarity why he had been called to serve as its guardian and protector. The animals that lived in his forest had grown so accustomed to his presence that they moved about their daily lives without the slightest fear or concern when he was near. Deer would graze peacefully within arm's reach of where he sat, their fawns playing and leaping with joyful abandon while their mothers watched with calm, trusting eyes. Foxes would curl up in sunny patches nearby, their red coats gleaming like burnished copper in the dappled light, while overhead, generations of birds had built their nests in the branches, filling the air with a constant symphony of songs and calls that spoke of contentment and safety. Even the more solitary creatures, the wildcats and the wolves, would occasionally emerge from the deeper parts of the forest to acknowledge his presence with a respectful nod before disappearing once again into the green shadows. This harmony extended beyond the boundaries of his immediate sanctuary as well. The network of healers and wise folk that had grown from his teachings continued to flourish and expand, creating pockets of understanding and compassion throughout the lands of men. These practitioners had learned not only the specific techniques of herbcraft and animal communication that Radagast had taught, but more importantly, they had absorbed the deeper philosophy that lay beneath these skills. They understood that true healing could not be accomplished through knowledge alone, but required a fundamental shift in perspective, a recognition that healer and patient, human and animal, forest and field, were all part of the same vast, interconnected whole. As news of their successes spread, carried by travelling merchants and wandering minstrels, by pilgrims and scholars and ordinary folk who had experienced their healing touch, more and more people began to seek out this ancient wisdom. Some came from great distances, drawn by stories of miraculous recoveries and profound transformations. Others discovered the teachings closer to home, finding that their own neighbours and family members had quietly become part of this growing tradition. The knowledge spread like seeds carried on the wind, taking root wherever it found fertile ground, adapting to local conditions while maintaining its essential character. Radagast watched this development with a mixture of wonder and gentle amusement. He had never intended to found a movement or establish a school of thought, yet that was precisely what had happened. The wisdom he had preserved from the elder days was proving to be remarkably resilient and adaptable, capable of expressing itself in countless different forms while never losing its essential truth. In the northern kingdoms, it manifested as a tradition of forest wardens who could communicate with the great trees and understand their needs. In the southern lands, it became a practice of desert guides who could read the subtle signs of wind and sand and led travellers safely across the vast expanses of burning stone. Along the coasts, it emerged as a knowledge of the tides and currents, of the secret languages spoken by dolphins and whales in the depths of the sea. Each of these traditions was unique, shaped by the particular landscape and culture in which it had taken root, yet all shared the same fundamental understanding of the interconnectedness of all life. This diversity delighted Radagast, for it showed that the wisdom he had helped to preserve was not a rigid dogma, but a living truth, capable of endless variation and growth. He began to receive visits from practitioners who had travelled from these distant lands, eager to share their discoveries and learn from his experience. These meetings were always joyful occasions, filled with the excitement of recognition as kindred spirits found each other across the vast expanses of Middle-earth. One such visitor was an elderly woman from the far eastern reaches of Rovanion, where the great forest of greenwood gradually gave way to rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon. She had spent her life learning the ways of the wild horses that roamed those plains, and could speak their language with such fluency that entire herds would gather around her when she called. Her understanding of their social structures and migration patterns had helped her people avoid conflicts and establish peaceful relationships with these magnificent creatures. When she met Radagast, the two of them spent days in deep conversation, sharing stories and insights that enriched both of their understandings of the natural world. Another memorable encounter was with a young man from the White Mountains, who had discovered an ability to communicate with the great eagles that nested in the highest peaks. Through patient observation and careful study, he had learned to interpret their aerial displays and understand the complex territorial arrangements that governed their society. His knowledge had proven invaluable to the mountain communities, helping them to avoid areas where the eagles were nesting and to predict changes in weather patterns based on the birds' behavior. When he visited Radagast's sanctuary, the wizard was delighted to introduce him to his own feathered friends and to watch as the young man's eyes lit up with recognition and joy as he found himself welcomed into their aerial conversations. These exchanges of knowledge and experience created a sense of unity and purpose that transcended the boundaries of geography and culture. The practitioners who were part of this growing network began to think of themselves not just as isolated individuals pursuing their own path, but as members of a vast community of like-minded souls who shared a common mission. They developed subtle ways of recognizing each other, not through any formal signs or passwords, but through their approach to the natural world and their understanding of the deeper principles that governed all life. A healer in one village might recognize a kindred spirit in a visiting trader by the way he spoke to his pack animals, or by his knowledge of which herbs grew best in which seasons. A forest guide might identify a fellow practitioner by her ability to read the subtle signs that indicated the presence of different creatures, or by her respectful manner when gathering plants for medicinal use. This growing sense of community brought with it a deeper understanding of their collective responsibility. The practitioners began to realize that they were not just individual healers and wise folk, but guardians of a precious tradition that needed to be preserved and passed on to future generations. They took this responsibility seriously, establishing informal schools and apprenticeships, creating songs and stories that would help preserve the essential teachings, and developing rituals and practices that would ensure the continuity of their knowledge. The tradition began to take on a life of its own, growing and evolving in ways that none of its founders could have anticipated. As Radagast contemplated these developments from his forest sanctuary, he felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The work that he had begun so many ages ago, driven by his love for the natural world and his desire to preserve the ancient wisdom, had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined. The knowledge that had once been the exclusive province of the Vala and the Eldar was now taking root in the hearts and minds of ordinary men and women, transforming their lives and communities in ways both subtle and profound. The Fourth Age was indeed proving to be an age of great change and transformation, but it was change that honored the past while embracing the future, that preserved the essential truths while allowing for endless creativity and adaptation. In the deepening twilight of his long existence, Radagast found himself increasingly content to remain in his beloved forest, tending to his animals and plants, welcoming the occasional visitor who sought his wisdom, and simply being present as a living bridge between the ancient world and the new. His physical form had grown even more weathered and worn with the passing years, his robes more patched and faded, his beard longer and more tangled with twigs and leaves. Yet his eyes remained bright with an inner fire that spoke of undiminished passion and purpose, and his gentle hands retained their healing power, bringing comfort and restoration to all who needed his touch. He was a living testament to the enduring power of gentle perseverance, a quiet force of nature in his own right, inextricably bound to the very earth he protected. The rhythms of his days were simple, yet profound. Each dawn brought with it a fresh symphony of birdsong, a chorus he knew intimately, each species contributing its unique melody to the unfolding day. He would rise with the first blush of light, his movements unhurried, a quiet communion with the waking forest. A simple meal of wild berries and nuts, perhaps a handful of honey from a carefully tended hive, would sustain him through the morning. His mornings were often spent in careful observation, watching the dance of sunlight through the leaves, noting the subtle shifts in the wind, listening to the murmuring of the streams. He understood that true knowledge did not come from books alone, but from a profound attunement to the world around him, a patient receptivity to its myriad messages. Sometimes a distressed creature would seek him out, a bird with a broken wing, a young deer caught in a thicket. Radagast would approach with a tenderness that transcended language, his hands, calloused from years of working with the earth, moving with an almost ethereal grace. He would whisper soft words of comfort, words that seemed to carry the very essence of healing, and apply poultices of herbs he had gathered himself, each one chosen with meticulous care for its specific properties. The creatures, sensing his profound compassion, would often remain still under his touch, their fear slowly giving way to a quiet trust. He never sought to dominate or control, but rather to assist, to guide, to facilitate the natural processes of restoration. His afternoons might involve long, slow walks through the deeper parts of the forest, areas known only to him and the creatures who called them home. He would check on ancient trees, speaking to them in a low, resonant tone, a language that was perhaps more vibration and intent than spoken word. He understood that these venerable sentinels held within their rings the history of ages, silent witnesses to countless seasons, and he revered them as living libraries of the earth. He would meticulously remove any encroaching vines that might stifle their growth, or clear away fallen branches that blocked vital sunlight, always with a deep respect for the interconnectedness of all things. He never saw himself as separate from the forest, but rather as an integral part of its vast, pulsing ecosystem. Evenings brought a change in the forest's symphony. The daytime birds would quiet, replaced by the hooting of owls, the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, and the gentle chirping of crickets. Radagast would often sit by a small, carefully tended fire, its warmth a comforting presence against the cool night air. He would gaze into the flickering flames, his mind drifting through the long tapestry of his memories, recalling the ancient days in Valinor, the wisdom of Yavanna, the vibrant life of the primeval forests of Middle-earth. He would remember the stern counsel of Saruman, the sharp wit of Gandalf, and the quiet dignity of the elves. All these experiences, woven together, had shaped him into the being he had become, a guardian of the wild, a silent witness to the unfolding story of Arda. Occasionally, a traveller, lost or seeking guidance, would stumble upon his humble dwelling. These encounters were rare, for Radagast did not seek out the company of men, nor did he advertise his presence. But when they did occur, he would offer what aid he could, providing warmth, sustenance, and sometimes a few carefully chosen words of wisdom. He never preached or lectured, but rather spoke in parables, in gentle suggestions, allowing the seeker to find their own path. He understood that true wisdom could not be forced, but had to be discovered within oneself. He might simply point to a particular moss growing on a stone, or observe the flight of a hawk, and in those simple acts, a profound lesson would often be conveyed. His presence alone seemed to radiate a calming influence, and many who left his company felt a renewed sense of peace and direction, even if they could not articulate the source of their transformation. As the Fourth Age continued its slow, inexorable march, Radagast found himself reflecting more and more on the nature of change and continuity. He had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the ebb and flow of empires, the coming and going of countless generations of sentient beings. He had seen the beauty of creation and the devastation wrought by greed and ambition. Yet through it all, the forest endured. The trees continued to grow, the rivers continued to flow, and the cycle of life and death continued its ancient, unbroken rhythm. He understood that his purpose was not to stop the tides of change, but to safeguard the essential spirit of the wild, to ensure that even in the face of inevitable progress, a connection to the fundamental truths of nature would remain. His legacy, he knew, would not be found in grand monuments or heroic deeds celebrated in song. It would be found in the continued flourishing of the forests, in the health of the animals, in the quiet wisdom passed down through generations of those who lived close to the earth. It would be in the subtle shifting of human hearts towards a greater reverence for the natural world, a gentle awakening to their interconnectedness with all living things. He was a seed sower, a quiet gardener of souls, nurturing the nascent understanding that true prosperity lay not in conquest, but in harmony. In his moments of deepest contemplation, he would sometimes feel a faint echo of the music of the Ainur, the grand symphony that had brought Arda into being. He would trace its intricate patterns in the rustling leaves, in the intricate veins of a butterfly's wing, in the spiral of a snail's shell. He understood that the music was still being played, continuously, subtly, shaping the world in countless ways, and he saw himself as a humble instrument within that cosmic orchestra, striving to play his part with fidelity and grace. His existence was a testament to the idea that power does not always manifest in overt displays of force, but can reside in profound humility, in unwavering dedication, and in a boundless, unconditional love for creation. He was a reminder that even the smallest, most unassuming figures can play a crucial role in the grand narrative of existence, and that true strength often lies in quiet persistence and an abiding connection to the sacred. And so, in the quiet depths of his beloved forest, Radagast the Brown continued his vigil, a living legend whispered among the trees, a guardian of the wild heart of Middle-earth. His story, though largely unwritten in the annals of men, was etched into the very fabric of the earth, woven into the rustling leaves, carried on the wind, and whispered in the secret languages of the creatures he loved so dearly. He was, and would forever remain, a symbol of enduring hope, a gentle reminder that even in the face of great change, The ancient magic of the world and the quiet wisdom of its guardians would never truly fade away. His long presence was a balm for the spirit, a steady, unwavering beacon of peace in a world often fraught with strife. He was simply Radagast, the brown wizard, the friend of beasts and birds, the silent protector of the natural world, breathing with the forest, living with the earth, forever a part of its gentle, enduring rhythm. His days unfolded with a timeless rhythm, dictated not by the hurried clocks of men, but by the slow turning of the seasons, the waxing and waning of the moon, and the subtle shifts in the temperament of the forest itself. Each dawn brought with it new discoveries, new challenges, and new opportunities for quiet observation. He would often rise before the first rays of the sun pierced the eastern canopy, the air still cool and damp with the night's dew. His first companions would be the chirping birds, their melodies a joyous, unburdened ode to the waking world. He knew each call, each trill, could discern the subtle differences that spoke of a nesting robin, a foraging thrush, or the warning cry of a startled jay. These were not just sounds to him. They were the ongoing conversations of his extended family, a tapestry of communication he understood with an intuitive depth few others possessed. His mornings would typically involve a silent walk through the forest, his bare feet treading softly on moss-covered roots and fallen leaves. He moved with an almost ethereal grace, his staff, often adorned with clinging vines and sprouting fungi, acting as a natural extension of his being. He wasn't seeking anything specific, but rather he was listening, observing, allowing the forest to reveal its needs to him. Perhaps a young sapling was struggling for light beneath the dense canopy, or a stream had become partially dammed by fallen branches, threatening to flood a badger's set. He would address these issues with a gentle touch, a quiet word, his actions almost imperceptible to the casual observer, yet profoundly impactful within the delicate ecosystem of his domain. He rarely used overt magic for such tasks. His power lay more in his profound understanding of natural processes, his ability to coax and guide rather than to command. He was a physician to the forest, a silent healer of its minor ailments, ensuring its continued health and vitality. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the leaves, Radagast might spend hours simply sitting by a clear forest pool, watching the darting dragonflies, the shimmering fish, and the occasional otter slip in silently through the water. He didn't seek to disturb them, only to observe, to understand their intricate lives, their struggles, their triumphs. He saw in them reflections of the larger world, the constant dance of life and death, predator and prey, all held in a delicate balance. He learned patience from the slow, deliberate movements of a turtle, resilience from the hardy mosses clinging to ancient stones, and joy from the playful antics of young squirrels. His understanding of the world was not derived from dusty scrolls or arcane texts, but from the living, breathing book of nature itself, a book he read with an unparalleled devotion. His midday meals were simple affairs, often consisting of wild berries, edible fungi he had gathered, and perhaps a handful of nuts. He never hunted, for he saw no need to take a life when the forest offered such abundant gifts. He ate sparingly, his needs few, his focus always on the well-being of his beloved creatures and his verdant home. Sometimes a small bird would perch on his shoulder, or a curious deer would approach him, its large, gentle eyes filled with trust. These were the moments he cherished most, the unspoken communions that transcended language, speaking instead of pure, unadulterated connection. He was a confidant to the timid, a friend to the wild, a shepherd of the untamed heart of Middle-earth. The afternoons might find him tending to a sick animal, perhaps a fledgling fallen from its nest, or a fox caught in a hunter's snare. He possessed a remarkable intuitive knowledge of herbal remedies, passed down through the ages by his Ainur kin, and refined by centuries of direct observation. He would apply poultices of crushed leaves, administer tinctures of bark and root, and whisper soothing words to the suffering creature. His touch was gentle, his presence calming, and many an ailing animal found solace and healing under his care. He did not boast of his abilities, nor did he seek recognition. His reward was simply the sight of a creature restored to health, returning to its natural rhythm within the forest. As dusk began to paint the sky with hues of orange and purple, Radagast would often find a quiet clearing, or perhaps a comfortable hollow within the roots of an ancient tree where he would settle for the evening. He might sit in silent meditation, his mind attuned to the subtle energies of the forest, feeling the earth breathe beneath him, the slow pulse of its life. He would listen to the hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures beginning their nightly rounds, the distant howl of a wolf. These were the sounds of his home, the lullabies of his existence. He was never truly alone, for the forest was his constant companion, its myriad inhabitants his extended family. His nights were often spent in a light, dreamlike state, his consciousness not entirely severed from the waking world. He would often dream with the forest, experiencing its subtle shifts, its hidden dramas, its quiet unfolding. He might perceive a distant storm approaching, or sense a disturbance in the balance of a particular grove. These dreams were not fleeting fantasies, but rather profound insights, guiding his actions in the days to come. He was a part of the forest, and the forest was a part of him, their destinies intertwined in a dance as old as Arda itself. He carried a deep sadness within him, a quiet grief for the slow encroachment of shadows upon the world, the increasing discord that threatened to unravel the delicate tapestry of life he so dearly cherished. He sensed the growing power of Sauron, not through direct confrontation, but through the subtle poisoning of the earth, the darkening of hearts, the increasing callousness of men. He saw it in the blighted patches of forest, the unnatural silence in once vibrant areas, the fear in the eyes of creatures driven from their homes. This sadness, however, never turned to despair. Instead, it fueled his quiet resolve, strengthening his dedication to his sacred task. He understood that his role was not to conquer the darkness, but to preserve the light, to protect the fragile beauty of life wherever he could, to be a beacon of hope in the encroaching gloom. His heart held no hatred, no bitterness, only a profound compassion for all living things, even those who, through ignorance or malice, caused harm. He believed in the inherent goodness of creation, the fundamental harmony that lay beneath the surface of all conflict. He was a living embodiment of that belief, a testament to the enduring power of gentleness, patience, and unconditional love. He was a guardian, a healer, a silent witness to the ebb and flow of Middle-earth, and his presence was a constant, unwavering prayer for its enduring beauty and peace. He was, in essence, the quiet heart of the wild, beating in unison with the very earth, a timeless presence in a world ever changing, ever striving, ever whispering, its ancient, enduring secrets to those with the patience to listen. He was Radagast, the brown, the gentle, the deeply wise, and his story was intertwined with the very breath of life itself. His true name, as with all the Istari, was not of Middle-earth origin, but rather a name given to him in the Undying Lands, a name whispered in the halls of Valinor, a name that spoke of his inherent nature and his destined purpose. Aiwendil, they called him, meaning lover of birds. This name, though seldom used in Middle-earth, perfectly encapsulated his deep affection and connection to the feathered creatures that graced the skies and nested in the branches of ancient trees. He was a master of their languages, understanding not just their calls and songs, but the subtle emotions and information conveyed within them. He could speak to the swift hawk, the chattering magpie, the wise owl, and the tiny wren with equal ease, learning from them the secrets of the forest, the movements of creatures, and the changing whispers of the wind. They were his eyes and ears, his messengers and companions, carrying news across vast distances, often bringing him tidings that no other being could perceive. He wore simple robes, fashioned from the earthy tones of the forest floor, often adorned with leaves, twigs, and moss, as if he himself were a living extension of the woodlands. His hair and beard were long and tangled, intertwined with bits of nature, sometimes even hosting small, harmless insects or nesting birds, a testament to his absolute immersion in the natural world. He carried no grand staff of power, no shining sword, but rather a gnarled staff of wood, imbued with the quiet magic of the earth, often blossoming with small flowers or fungi according to the seasons. This staff was not for striking down foes, but for coaxing life from barren soil, for calming frightened beasts, and for communing with the very roots of the world. He moved through the forests with a light, almost ethereal grace, his footsteps barely disturbing the fallen leaves, his presence a rustle in the breeze rather than a crashing intrusion. Animals did not flee from him, but rather approached with curiosity and trust, sensing his gentle spirit and his profound respect for all forms of life. Bears might lumber past him without fear, deer graze peacefully near his presence, and rabbits nibble at plants just at his feet. His dwelling, Rhosgobel, was not a grand tower or a fortified keep, but a humble abode nestled deep within the eaves of Mirkwood, a place of quiet refuge and natural beauty. It was a dwelling crafted from living trees, a seamless blend of architecture and nature, where moss grew on the walls and vines draped gracefully from the windows. The roof was often overgrown with foliage, making it almost invisible from above, a secret sanctuary known only to the creatures of the forest and a select few who truly understood its significance. Inside, it was a place of warmth and earthy comfort, filled with the scents of herbs, damp earth, and wood smoke. Shelves were laden not with scrolls of ancient lore or tomes of forgotten spells, but with dried plants, jars of herbal concoctions, and intricately carved wooden figurines of animals. Birds often flew freely within, perching on rafters, singing their soft melodies, and sometimes even sharing a crumb or two from his simple meals. Here, he would tend to injured creatures, nurse sick plants back to health, and commune with the spirits of the forest, drawing strength and wisdom from the very heart of the wilderness. It was a place of healing, not just for the body, but for the spirit, a quiet haven of peace in a world increasingly troubled by shadows. Unlike Gandalf, who often journeyed far and wide, or Saruman, who delved into ancient texts and the mechanics of power. Radagast's sphere of influence was primarily the natural world. He was the protector of the flora and fauna, the guardian of the green things that grew and the creatures that roamed. He understood the intricate web of life, the delicate balance that sustained ecosystems, and the profound interconnectedness of all living beings. He was a master of healing, not just through herbs and poultices, but through a deep empathetic connection to the suffering of others. He could soothe pain with a gentle touch, calm fear with a soft murmur, and restore vigor with a subtle infusion of natural energy. His magic was not flashy or overt, but rather a quiet, pervasive influence, a nurturing force that encouraged growth, resilience, and harmony. He could persuade stubborn roots to loosen their hold, encourage shy blossoms to open, and guide lost animals back to their herds. His power was a reflection of the earth itself, patient, enduring, and endlessly regenerative. His purpose in Middle-earth, like that of the other Istari, was to aid the free peoples in their struggle against Sauron, but his methods were distinctly his own. He was not a general leading armies, nor a diplomat forging alliances, but rather a subtle force working behind the scenes, often unnoticed by the grand narratives of kings and wars. He would quietly observe the creeping darkness, understanding its effects on the land and its creatures long before others recognized the danger. He might guide endangered species away from encroaching blight, or help to restore balance to a polluted stream. He would send his animal messengers to gather intelligence, often providing crucial information to Gandalf or other allies without ever directly engaging in battle. His contributions were often indirect, yet profoundly impactful, like the steady, unseen growth of a sturdy oak, providing shelter and sustenance long after its planting. One instance, though brief, showcased his role in the broader conflict. He was the one who, through his connection with the birds and beasts, discovered the true nature of the necromancer inhabiting Dol Guldur. It was his acute senses, attuned to the subtle shifts in the forest's health, the inexplicable fear that gripped creatures near the fortress, and the dark whispers carried on the wind that led him to suspect a power far more sinister than a mere sorcerer. He observed the blight spreading from the evil stronghold, the unnatural silence descending upon once vibrant areas, and the insidious corruption seeping into the very earth. It was Radagast who sought out Gandalf, not with a formal summons or a dramatic plea, but with a quiet urgency, sharing his observations, his deep-seated unease, and the undeniable evidence of a growing malevolence. He brought with him the wisdom of the forest, the unspoken warnings of the natural world, a testament to the fact that evil did not just affect men and elves, but poisoned the very wellsprings of life. His communication with Gandalf was often steeped in the language of nature, not always immediately understood by those less attuned to his way of thinking. He might speak of the blight upon the ancient trees, or the fear in the heart of the deer, metaphors that Gandalf, with his own deep connection to the natural world, could interpret and understand. He dispatched birds, often great eagles, to carry messages, ensuring that vital information reached the right hands at the crucial moment. These were not mere animal messengers, but intelligent beings with whom Radagast shared a deep bond of trust and understanding. Creatures who understood the gravity of their tasks and carried their burdens with a grave dignity. Despite his deep immersion in the natural world, and his often solitary existence, Radagast was not ignorant of the affairs of men, elves, and dwarves. He observed their struggles, their triumphs, and their follies with a quiet understanding, though he seldom intervened directly in their political machinations. He understood that their destinies were intertwined with the health of the land, and that the fate of the forests often depended on the choices made by the speaking peoples. He held a particular fondness for the simple, wholesome lives of the hobbits, recognizing in their love for good food, good company, and the quiet comforts of home a reflection of the natural harmony he so deeply cherished. He saw in their unassuming bravery and their steadfast devotion to their land a powerful, understated resilience that would prove crucial in the coming struggle. His gentle nature and his unwavering commitment to life often led others to underestimate him, to dismiss him as a simple-minded hermit or a peculiar recluse. Yet, beneath his calm exterior lay a profound wisdom, an ancient power, and an unshakable conviction. He was not weak, but rather strong in a different way, a strength born of patience, empathy, and an intimate understanding of the subtle forces that shaped the world. He was a testament to the idea that true power did not always manifest in grand displays of force, but could also reside in quiet nurturing, steadfast guardianship, and boundless compassion. In the grand tapestry of Middle-earth, Radagast was a vital thread, often unseen, yet integral to the overall design. He was the unsung hero of the forests, the quiet protector of the wild, the gentle voice that whispered warnings and offered solace. His story is one of unwavering dedication, profound empathy, and a deep, abiding love for all living things. He chose a path less traveled, a path of quiet stewardship and gentle guardianship, and in doing so, he upheld the very essence of life against the encroaching darkness. He remained true to his nature, a steadfast beacon of green hope in a world increasingly overshadowed by grey. His presence was a silent prayer, a constant affirmation of life's enduring beauty, a testament to the profound power of gentleness and the quiet strength of the natural world. He was Radagast, the brown, the enduring spirit of the wild, forever intertwined with the ancient heart of Middle-earth. And so, as the ages turned and the shadows began to stretch longer across the lands, Radagast, the Brown, found his quiet stewardship increasingly challenged. The very air seemed to thicken with a subtle malaise, a creeping corruption that seeped from places once beautiful and now defiled. He felt it in the shuddering of the ancient oaks, heard it in the distressed cries of the forest creatures, and saw its insidious touch in the blight that began to creep across once vibrant mosses and ferns. This was not merely the natural cycle of decay, but something far more sinister, an unnatural twisting of life itself. His deep empathy for all living things meant that these disturbances resonated within him with a profound ache. He was not one to wield a sword or command armies, but his wisdom, born of centuries of observation and communion with the natural world, was a weapon of a different kind. He began to trace the origins of this encroaching darkness, following faint trails of corruption, listening to the whispered fears of the birds, and deciphering the troubled murmurs of the streams. He knew, with an instinct deeper than thought, that this was not a localized ill, but a symptom of a far greater sickness spreading from a malevolent source. One of the most significant moments in his early vigilance came with his increasing awareness of the insidious influence emanating from Dol Guldur. a grim fortress nestled in the southern reaches of Mirkwood. Once a fair and verdant wood, Mirkwood had become a place of dread and shadow. Its ancient name, Greenwood the Great, a distant, sorrowful echo. Radagast had watched with sorrow as the trees grew gnarled and sickly, as the light struggled to penetrate its canopy, and as foul creatures began to infest its depths. He knew that the source of this blight was not merely a natural decay, but a powerful evil will, and his heart, attuned to the very pulse of life, recoiled from its cold, deathly touch. He would often venture close to the borders of Dol Guldur, not openly or with any show of force, but as a silent observer, cloaked in the shadows of the forest itself. He sent his animal messengers, his eyes and ears in the wild, deeper into the corrupted wood, seeking to understand the nature of the evil that festered there. He communicated with the great eagles, those majestic lords of the air, whose keen sight and far-ranging flights gave them a unique perspective on the growing darkness. Through these varied channels, he began to piece together fragments of a horrifying truth, that the necromancer of Dol Guldur was not merely a dark sorcerer, but something far more ancient and terrible, a shadow from the long-vanished past stirring once more. His knowledge of these escalating threats naturally led him into occasional contact with the other Istari, his fellow wizards. Though their paths and temperaments often diverged, they were bound by their shared mission to protect Middle-earth. It was to Gandalf, perhaps, that Radagast felt the closest kinship, for Gandalf too possessed a deep love for the free peoples and a keen understanding of the subtle workings of the world. Though his methods were often more direct and his presence more overtly felt, Radagast supplied Gandalf with crucial information, often gleaned from the most unlikely sources: a whispered rumor from a frightened squirrel, a disturbed pattern in the flight of migratory birds, or the unusual growth of a noxious plant. These seemingly small details, when interpreted through Radagast's unique wisdom, often revealed significant insights into the machinations of the shadow. There is a tale, perhaps more widely known, of Radagast's indirect involvement in the earliest stages of the quest to reclaim Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, from the dragon Smaug. While not directly joining the company of Thorin Oakenshield and his companions, Radagast played a subtle yet crucial role. It was he who, upon discovering Gandalf's capture by the necromancer in Dol Guldur, sent a message to the White Council. This message, carried by the swift and loyal eagles, alerted the powerful elves and wizards to Gandalf's plight, leading to the decisive attack on Dol Guldur that temporarily drove the necromancer out and allowed Gandalf to escape. Without Radagast's intervention, Gandalf might have remained imprisoned, and the unfolding events of the Hobbit's adventure, and indeed the larger War of the Ring, might have taken a far darker turn. This often overlooked act of quiet bravery underscores his importance, demonstrating that his strength was not in direct combat, but in his deep understanding of the natural world and his ability to communicate across different species and realms. Beyond these grander narratives, Radagast's days were filled with countless smaller acts of stewardship. He would heal sick animals, coax blighted plants back to health, and guide lost travelers through the most treacherous parts of the forests. He spoke with trees as one might converse with an old friend, understanding their slow, patient wisdom and their deep roots in the earth. He knew the secrets of the herbs and flowers, the songs of the birds, and the silent language of the stones. He was a living embodiment of the forests he protected, a spirit of the wild made manifest in a gentle, unassuming form. He was often perceived as eccentric, perhaps even simple-minded by those who did not understand the depth of his connection to the natural world. His clothes, woven from natural fibers and adorned with leaves and twigs, often looked disheveled. His hair and beard were a tangled mass, often housing small birds or insects who found comfort in his gentle presence. He spoke in soft murmurs, sometimes to himself, sometimes to the creatures around him, his words often laced with archaic lore and observations about the subtle shifts in the seasons. But beneath this somewhat rustic exterior lay a mind as sharp and observant as any, though its focus was on the pulse of life rather than the clamour of civilization. As the shadow of Sauron grew more pronounced, and the whispers of war began to echo across the lands, Radagast felt the strain on his spirit more acutely. The creatures of the forest, his beloved companions, grew increasingly agitated and fearful. The very balance of nature seemed to tilt precariously, threatening to unleash chaos and destruction. He knew that the time for quiet guardianship was drawing to a close, and that the forces of good would need to unite against the looming darkness. His role in the War of the Ring was not one of direct participation on the battlefields, but his influence was no less significant. He continued to be a source of vital intelligence, observing the movements of the enemy's forces through the eyes of his animal allies and relaying crucial warnings. He used his deep knowledge of the land to guide those who sought refuge, or to help those who needed to travel unseen. He worked tirelessly to heal the blighted lands, to offer solace to the frightened creatures, and to maintain pockets of natural harmony amidst the encroaching discord. His presence was a quiet reassurance that even in the darkest of times, the spirit of life and growth persisted. His steadfast refusal to abandon his post in Rhosgobel, his beloved home on the eaves of Mirkwood, even as the darkness threatened to engulf it, was a testament to his unwavering commitment. He was the unwavering anchor for the dwindling light in that troubled region, a bastion of hope for the beleaguered creatures and the remaining pockets of natural beauty. He understood that some battles are fought not with swords and shields, but with resilience, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the enduring power of life. The precise fate of Radagast after the War of the Ring remains somewhat shrouded in the gentle mists of lore, much like his own quiet nature. Unlike Gandalf, who returned to the Undying Lands, or Saruman, who met a tragic end, Radagast's path is less clearly defined. It is generally believed that he, like the other Istari, was ultimately recalled to the west, his mission in Middle-earth complete. However, there are some who whisper that perhaps, in his deep love for the living world, he chose to remain to continue his quiet guardianship, becoming one with the very forests he had protected for so long. One can imagine him, in the peaceful days that followed Sauron's defeat, still wandering the rejuvenated forests, his presence a comforting balm to the healing land. Perhaps he continued to communicate with the creatures, sharing in their renewed joy and watching over the slow, patient process of recovery. His form, perhaps, grew even more intertwined with the natural world, his features softening, his movements becoming as fluid as the rustle of leaves in the wind. He might have become a legend whispered among the trees, a guardian spirit of the wild, forever a part of the enduring magic of Middle-earth. His story serves as a gentle reminder that heroism comes in many forms. It is not always in grand gestures or mighty battles, but can also be found in quiet dedication, in boundless empathy, and in an unwavering commitment to the preservation of life itself. Radagast, the brown, the steadfast protector of the wild, embodied these virtues with every fibre of his being. He was a living testament to the profound power of gentleness, the quiet strength of compassion, and the enduring beauty of the natural world. His legacy is etched not in stone, but in the rustling leaves of ancient trees, in the clear waters of healing streams, and in the harmonious songs of the forest creatures. He reminds us that even the smallest and most unassuming among us can possess a wisdom and a strength that can turn the tide against the greatest darkness. His tale is a lullaby for the soul, a soothing whisper of hope and resilience in the vast, ancient tapestry of Middle-earth. The world of Arda, in its deepest essence, is a realm imbued with song, a melody sung into being by the Ainur, the Holy Ones, before the very dawn of time. And Radagast, in his quiet way, was a living echo of that primordial music, a gentle hum of creation that resonated with the very earth. He was not a discordant note seeking to dominate or control, but a harmonious chord, blending seamlessly with the verdant symphonies of the forests and the murmuring rivers. His understanding of the world was born not of intellectual study alone, but of an intrinsic connection, a deep, abiding empathy that allowed him to hear the silent language of growing things and the unspoken thoughts of the creatures that dwelled within them. This profound connection to the natural world was, in a way, his greatest strength and perhaps, in the eyes of some, his greatest perceived weakness. For while Gandalf moved through the courts of kings and the halls of the wise, influencing the destinies of nations, Radagast busied himself with the small, vital details of life. The health of a badger's set, the migration patterns of birds, the intricate network of roots beneath the forest floor. Yet, it was precisely this intimate knowledge, this dedication to the minute, that often provided crucial insights that even the most learned scholars overlooked. His network of animal messengers, unseen by most, was a web of intelligence that stretched across the wilderness, bringing him whispers of change, of encroaching shadow, long before they reached the ears of men or elves. One can imagine him, in the days leading up to the Great War, sensing the subtle shifts in the wind, the growing unease in the animal kingdom, long before the first cries of battle rent the air. Perhaps the squirrels, usually so bold, grew skittish, hoarding nuts with an uncharacteristic fervour. Perhaps the bears, typically lumbering and slow to anger, became restless, their growls echoing with a primal warning. Radagast would have felt these tremors, these premonitions, not as abstract notions, but as tangible feelings woven into the very fabric of the world around him. His heart, attuned to the rhythm of life, would have ached with the foreknowledge of impending sorrow, even as he continued his quiet work of healing and protection. He was a guardian, not just of the large and majestic, but of the small and vulnerable. A lost fawn, shivering in the cold, would find solace in his gentle hands. A struggling sapling, overshadowed by its larger kin, would receive his patient attention. Perhaps a whispered word of encouragement that only the trees themselves could truly understand. His magic was not a flashy display of power, but a subtle encouragement of inherent life, a gentle nudge towards flourishing. He understood that true strength often lay in nurturing, in fostering growth, rather than in wielding destructive force. The other Istari, more focused on the affairs of men and the machinations of power, sometimes found his devotion to the wild, eccentric, even impractical. Saruman, with his thirst for knowledge and control, likely viewed Radagast's methods as naive, a distracting indulgence. Gandalf, while respecting Radagast's heart, often found him a little too absorbed in his own domain, a little too difficult to draw away from his beloved creatures for the broader concerns of Middle-earth. Yet, it was this very absorption, this single-minded dedication, that allowed Radagast to become an unparalleled expert in his field, a living repository of forgotten wisdom concerning the natural world. Think of the countless species of flora and fauna known only to him, the intricate medicinal properties of obscure herbs, the ancient migratory paths of birds that spanned continents. He was a walking encyclopedia of the wild, a living library of ecological knowledge that would be lost forever without his presence. In a world increasingly threatened by the destructive forces of industry and war, his role as a preserver of this vital biodiversity was more crucial than ever. He was a steward, a caretaker, not just of a small patch of forest, but of the intricate web of life that sustained all of Middle-earth. His appearance, so unkempt and earthy, was a reflection of his soul. The tangled beard, the bird droppings in his hair, the leaves clinging to his robes. These were not signs of neglect, but badges of honor, testaments to a life lived in communion with the untamed. He wore the wild upon him, not as a disguise, but as a second skin, a natural extension of his being. He was a creature of the forest, as much as the badger in its burrow or the hawk in its nest, and his voice, when he spoke, was said to be soft like the rustling of leaves or the gentle murmur of a stream. It was a voice that could soothe frightened animals and calm troubled spirits, a voice that carried the ancient wisdom of the earth itself. One can almost hear it now, a low, melodic hum, speaking of the interconnectedness of all things, of the cycles of life and death, of the enduring resilience of nature. His interactions with the other characters of Middle-earth, though fewer than Gandalf's, were always marked by his unique perspective. When he encountered Bilbo Baggins near Mirkwood, during the events preceding the Great Adventure, his concern was primarily for the well-being of the forest and its creatures, a concern that perhaps seemed trivial to those focused on dragons and gold. Yet, his warning about the growing darkness in Mirkwood was a crucial piece of information, a subtle indicator of the evil creeping ever closer. And later, when Gandalf sought him out for counsel regarding the necromancer in Dol Guldur, Radagast, despite his reluctance to leave the forest, provided vital assistance. It was his deep understanding of the dark arts affecting the natural world, his ability to discern the corrupted essence of the growing evil that allowed him to confirm Gandalf's suspicions. His contribution, though not a feat of martial prowess, was an act of profound courage and wisdom, stepping into a realm of darkness that was anathema to his very being, all for the greater good of the world he so dearly loved. The tale of Radagast is a counterpoint to the grand narratives of kings and armies. It reminds us that there are different forms of power, different ways to serve the light. His power lay in empathy, in observation, in the quiet art of fostering life. While others wielded swords and spells, he wielded understanding and compassion, tending to the intricate balance of the natural world, a balance that is often overlooked but is utterly essential for the survival of all. His legacy, therefore, is not one of towering monuments or celebrated victories, but of countless small acts of kindness, of countless lives saved, of countless moments of quiet guardianship. It is a legacy etched in the rejuvenated growth of a deforested glade, in the return of a rare bird species, in the flourishing of a forgotten wildflower. It is a legacy woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth, a silent but ever-present testament to the enduring power of gentle strength. As the ages turn and the memory of great battles fades, the rustling leaves will continue to whisper his name. The clear streams will echo his quiet wisdom, and the creatures of the forest will remember the kind hand that nurtured them. Radagast the Brown, the friend of beasts and birds, the protector of the wild, remains an eternal presence in the heart of Middle-earth, a soothing balm to a world often scarred by conflict, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest times, the enduring power of life, in all its myriad forms, will always find a way to flourish, guided by the silent, steadfast watch of those who truly understand its precious beauty. His story is a lullaby, a soft, comforting hum carried on the evening breeze, inviting a deep and peaceful rest as the ancient world of Middle-earth continues its timeless journey. And so, as the sun dips below the western hills, casting long, peaceful shadows across the land, we can imagine Radagast, perhaps, seated quietly beneath the ancient boughs of a great oak, its roots deep in the fertile earth, its branches reaching towards the fading light. He is not alone, for around him the forest stirs with the soft sounds of evening. A tiny field mouse, bold in its trust, might scurry close, its whiskers twitching, seeking a dropped berry or a crumb of bread from his simple satchel. Overhead, a nuthatch, its tiny claws gripping the rough bark, would offer a soft chirrup, a greeting to the kindly wizard. The very air around him would be alive with a gentle hum, the unspoken language of the natural world, a symphony only he could truly understand. His dwelling, if one could call it that, was never a grand edifice. No towering stone walls, no intricate carvings, no roaring hearths, like those found in the halls of men, or even the simpler abodes of hobbits. Instead, Radagast's home was woven from the very fabric of the forest itself, perhaps a hollow in a massive ancient tree, its interior smoothed by time and the patient work of countless small creatures. Or a hidden grotto, sheltered by moss-covered rocks and trailing vines, where the sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns, painting shimmering designs on the damp earth. His bed would be a simple pallet of dried leaves and soft moss, collected with care, giving back to the forest only what it could spare. His warmth would come from the thick cloak he always wore, or perhaps a small, carefully built fire, its smoke thin and wispy, barely disturbing the stillness of the air, its embers glowing like watchful eyes in the deepening twilight. His meals would be equally simple, harvested from the bounty of the woods, wild berries, sweet and tart, gathered from thorny bushes, edible fungi, picked with an expert eye, knowing which was safe and which held danger. Nuts, cracked with a smooth stone, their rich kernels a welcome sustenance. Occasionally, a small fish, perhaps caught with a patient hand from a clear, bubbling stream cooked over a tiny flame, its scent mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest. He would eat slowly, savouring each bite, feeling the life-giving energy of the earth flow into him. a silent communion with the world he protected. He carried few possessions, for material wealth held no meaning for him. His staff, of course, was an extension of himself, a sturdy branch, perhaps from a young sapling he had lovingly tended, imbued with a quiet power, a connection to the living world. Its surface would be worn smooth by countless journeys, polished by the touch of his hand, its natural knots and twists forming patterns like ancient runes, and his bird's nest, perpetually perched upon his head, was more than just a peculiar adornment. It was a symbol, a testament to his unique bond with the creatures of the air. It was a living, breathing part of him, a constant reminder of the delicate balance of life, a tiny home for the small, fluttering beings who nested there, finding sanctuary in his presence. His days were not filled with the grand quests of other wizards, nor the diplomatic, intricate dance of kings and elves. Instead, his time was spent in observation, in tending, in listening. He would walk for hours, his steps light and silent, his keen eyes missing nothing. The subtle shift in the colour of a leaf, signalling a change in the season or a touch of blight. The faint tracks of a deer, revealing its path to a hidden spring. The anxious cry of a young bird, lost from its nest, prompting him to gently guide it back to safety. He understood the intricate dance of predator and prey, the slow, relentless march of growth and decay, the delicate threads that bound all living things together. He would spend countless hours simply watching, absorbing the silent wisdom of the forest. He might sit by a riverbank, mesmerized by the ceaseless flow of water over smooth stones, understanding its journey from mountain peak to distant sea, its life-giving sustenance to all that grew along its banks. Or he might observe a colony of ants, their tireless industry, their complex social structure, a miniature kingdom thriving beneath his gaze. He learned from them all, from the smallest insect to the tallest tree, seeing in each a reflection of the greater design, a piece of the grand tapestry of Middle-earth. His magic, too, was of a different kind. It was not the fiery blasts of Gandalf, nor the subtle enchantments of Saruman, nor the ancient, elemental power of the elves. Radagast's magic was a gentle coaxing, a nurturing touch. He could whisper to a wilting plant, encouraging its roots to draw deeper, its leaves to unfurl towards the sun. He could soothe a frightened animal, calming its wild heart with a gentle touch and a soft word. He could discern the hidden remedies in herbs and roots, concocting poultices and salves for injured creatures, or remedies for the ailments of the forest itself. His power was a force of healing and growth, a quiet strength that resisted the encroachment of decay and corruption. He was, in many ways, a living embodiment of the spirit of the wild, a guardian of its untamed beauty. He understood that the wild places of Middle-earth were not merely uninhabited spaces, but vital organs of the world, breathing life into the land, providing sanctuary for countless species, holding ancient secrets within their depths. He knew that if these places withered, a part of Middle-earth's soul would wither with them, and so he served as their silent protector, their advocate, their voice in a world that often forgot their importance. His interactions with the peoples of Middle-earth were infrequent and often brief. He preferred the company of the forest and its creatures, finding in them an honesty and a purity that was often lacking in the affairs of men, elves, and even dwarves. When he did encounter them, he was often perceived as eccentric, perhaps a little mad, with his rustling clothes and his bird's nest hat, his eyes that seemed to see more than others, and his words that often spoke of the subtle language of the wild. Yet there was always a spark of kindness in his gaze, a gentle wisdom that shone through his unassuming exterior. The legends of Radagast among the forest folk, the scattered communities living on the fringes of the great woods, would be hushed and reverent. Tales of a strange, kindly man who could speak with animals, who could mend broken wings and heal blighted crops. They would speak of his sudden appearances and disappearances, like a phantom of the forest itself, a silent protector who would emerge when needed, then vanish back into the green depths. They would leave small offerings for him, a bowl of fresh milk, a handful of dried fruit, a piece of warm bread placed at the foot of an ancient tree, a silent gesture of gratitude and respect for the wizard who watched over their world. Even the Ents, the ancient shepherds of the trees, would likely have a deep, if unspoken, respect for Radagast. Their paths, though rarely crossing, would be guided by a shared purpose, the preservation of the primeval forests. They would recognize in him a kindred spirit, one who understood the slow, deliberate rhythm of the trees, the deep wisdom of the earth. Perhaps, occasionally, a young Entling, curious and slow to speak, would wander near his hidden dwelling, observing him with ancient, knowing eyes, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. The great wars that scarred Middle-earth, the epic clashes of good and evil, often took place far from Radagast's quiet domain. While Gandalf rode with kings and rallied armies, and Saruman delved into forbidden knowledge and raised his own legions, Radagast remained in the wild. His battle was fought on a different front, a constant, unseen struggle against the slow creep of decay, the blighting touch of corruption, the subtle poisoning of the land itself. He understood that even if the great evils were vanquished, if the natural world was ruined, victory would be hollow. His work was the foundation upon which all other victories rested. For what good is a kingdom without fertile land? What joy is there in peace if the forests are silent and the rivers run dry? Radagast understood this fundamental truth, and his unwavering dedication to the natural world was, in its own way, as crucial as any sword stroke or spell cast in the name of liberty. As the Third Age drew to a close, and the shadow of Sauron lengthened across the lands, Radagast's quiet vigilance became even more vital. The darkness did not only manifest in marching armies and fell creatures, but also in the subtle corruption of the earth, the sickness that spread through forests, the fear that drove animals from their ancient homes. He would have been keenly aware of these insidious changes, fighting them with every ounce of his gentle power, a silent, steadfast bulwark against the encroaching despair. And as the ring was finally destroyed and the shadow lifted, Radagast would not have sought accolades or recognition. He would simply have felt the subtle shift in the air, the return of a healthier pulse to the earth, the slow healing of the land. His reward would be the sight of a forest thriving once more, the sound of birdsong returning to a silenced glade, the fresh scent of rain on newly green leaves. He would have known, with a quiet certainty, that his work, in its own humble way, had contributed to the victory, that the world he loved so dearly had been saved, not just from the clutches of evil, but for the flourishing of life itself. His ultimate fate, like so much of his life, remains shrouded in the gentle mists of lore. Did he, like Gandalf, eventually return to the Undying Lands, his mission fulfilled, his spirit reunited with the Valar? Or did he choose to remain a perpetual guardian, a timeless whisper in the deepest woods, forever watching over the changing face of Middle-earth, his form becoming one with the ancient trees and the flowing rivers he so cherished? The answer is not given, but perhaps that is fitting. For Radagast was never one for grand departures or dramatic exits. His presence was subtle, his influence enduring, like the slow, steady growth of a mighty forest. We can imagine him simply fading into the landscape, his form becoming indistinct from the dappled light and shadow of the deep woods, his voice mingling with the rustling leaves, his spirit infused into the very essence of the natural world. A constant, comforting presence, a reminder that the wild heart of Middle-earth beats on, protected by those who truly understand its precious, fragile beauty. His story, a gentle breeze through ancient boughs, continues to lull us towards a tranquil slumber, a peaceful dream of a world where wisdom and kindness, in their quiet forms, are the most profound powers of all. The whispers of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the soft hum of insects. These were the languages Radagast understood most profoundly. His counsel, when given, was less about strategy or war, and more about the interconnectedness of all living things, the delicate balance that, once disrupted, could wreak havoc far beyond the immediate battlefield. He saw the world not as a collection of separate entities, but as a vast, intricate tapestry, each thread dependent on the next. A blight on a single tree, to him, was a symptom of a larger illness, a sign that the very fabric of existence was under assault. His concern for the smallest creature was no less than his concern for the mightiest oak, for in his wisdom he knew that the strength of the whole lay in the health of its smallest parts. This deep empathy for the natural world meant that the encroaching shadow of Sauron would have been particularly agonizing for Radagast. The pollution of the rivers, the felling of ancient forests, the twisting of once beautiful creatures into grotesque parodies of themselves. These were not merely acts of war, but acts of profound desecration. While Gandalf rallied kings and armies, and Saruman delved into ancient lore for power, Radagast would have been diligently, quietly, tending to the wounds inflicted upon the earth. Imagine him, his long, brown robes blending into the bark of the trees, his hands gently tracing the lines of a wilting plant, murmuring words of comfort and healing. Perhaps he would spend days, or even weeks, coaxing life back into a barren patch of ground, his patience as boundless as the slow turning of the seasons. He would be a silent, tireless sentinel, a guardian of the green world, his heart aching with each new scar upon the landscape, yet never despairing, always believing in the resilience of life, in the eventual triumph of light and growth over darkness and decay. His understanding of the animal kingdom was unparalleled. He could speak to the birds, not in the simple mimicry of a man, but in the true tongue of their hearts, understanding their fears, their joys, their instincts. The great eagles, proud and ancient, would heed his call, not out of obligation, but out of respect for his wisdom and purity of spirit. They sensed in him a kindred soul, one who understood the vast, untamed wilderness they embodied. Their keen eyes, soaring high above the clouds, would bring him news from distant lands, reports of the shadows' creeping advance, of the shifting patterns of migrating beasts, of the subtle changes in the very air itself. These seemingly insignificant details to Radagast were vital pieces of a much larger puzzle, providing him with an unparalleled understanding of the unfolding conflict, an ecological intelligence that no king or general could ever hope to possess. He was the Earth's own spy, its silent confidant. His dwelling, the humble Rhosgobel, would have been less a house and more a continuation of the forest itself. Imagine it nestled deep within the eaves of the wood, perhaps a hollowed-out tree of immense age, or a structure so overgrown with vines and moss that it appeared to have grown organically from the earth. Sunlight would filter through the canopy, dappling the floor, and the air would be thick with the scent of damp earth, rich soil, and the countless blossoms and herbs he tended. Animals would share his abode without fear, birds nesting within the rafters, small creatures scurrying across the floor, finding warmth and refuge in his gentle presence. There would be no grand furnishings, no polished surfaces, only the natural textures of wood and stone, soft moss underfoot, and the quiet hum of life all around him. It would be a place of peace, a sanctuary from the growing turmoil outside, a living testament to his enduring love for the wild. In this tranquil haven, Radagast would have spent his days observing, tending, and learning. He would have catalogued the myriad species of flora and fauna, not with the dry precision of a scholar, but with the loving devotion of a caretaker. He would understand the subtle language of the wind through the pines, the murmur of a flowing stream, the distant roar of a bear, each sound a note in the vast symphony of nature. His knowledge of herbs and their healing properties would have been immense, not merely for physical ailments, but for the deeper sicknesses that afflicted the land itself. He might have concocted poultices of ancient roots and dew-kissed leaves, potions that would restore vitality to blighted soil or soothe the agitated spirits of frightened animals. His magic, if one were to call it that, was not a force to command, but a subtle art of cooperation, of aligning himself with the inherent energies of the natural world, gently guiding them towards healing and balance. His interactions with other beings, particularly other sentient races, would have been marked by a certain shyness, a preference for the company of beasts and trees. He was not aloof, but rather his primary focus lay elsewhere. When he did encounter men, elves, or dwarves, he would have done so out of necessity, perhaps to warn them of an impending danger to the forest, or to guide them through treacherous paths known only to the creatures of the wild. His words might have been few, but they would have carried the weight of ages, the wisdom of the earth itself. He would have spoken plainly, directly, concerned only with the truth of the matter, unburdened by the complexities of political intrigue or social niceties. He would have been seen as eccentric, perhaps even a bit mad, by those who did not understand his deep connection to the natural world. But those who truly saw him, who recognized the purity of his heart and the depth of his knowledge, would have held him in the highest regard, understanding that his quiet dedication was as crucial to the survival of Middle-earth as any sword or spell. The coming of the Istari to Middle-earth was a moment of profound significance, a last hope granted by the Valar to aid in the struggle against Sauron. While Gandalf's path led him to councils of war and the hearts of kings, and Saruman's to the accumulation of power and knowledge, Radagast's path was always intertwined with the very essence of the land. His mission was not to lead armies or to forge alliances with mortal rulers, but to safeguard the living world, to be its voice its protector, its healer. He was the conscience of the natural order, a constant reminder that the fate of Middle-earth was intrinsically linked to the health of its forests, its rivers, its creatures. Without him, the very spirit of the land might have withered and died, even if the armies of good had prevailed. His silent, steadfast work was the foundation upon which all other victories rested. When the shadow was finally defeated and the great war came to an end, the return to peace would have been a profoundly moving experience for Radagast. He would have felt the lifting of the oppression not just in the minds of men, but in the very soil beneath his feet, in the renewed vigor of the sprouting seeds, in the clarity of the flowing streams. The silent suffering of the earth would begin to heal, slowly, patiently, guided by the unseen hand of nature, aided by the gentle touch of the brown Istari. He would not have joined in the celebrations of kings or the feasts of victory. Instead, he would have retreated to the quiet heart of his beloved forest, perhaps sitting beneath an ancient tree, listening to the renewed symphony of life, a soft smile gracing his gentle face. His reward was the world itself, breathing freely once more. His ultimate fate, as we've pondered before, remains a beautiful mystery. It is a testament to his character that his story does not conclude with a grand pronouncement or a definitive ending. He simply is. He is the rustle in the leaves, the murmur of the stream, the distant call of a wild bird. He is the quiet strength of the ancient forest, the enduring spirit of the untamed wilderness. He is the memory of a time when wisdom was found not in books or in power, but in the patient observation of the natural world, in the deep communion with all living things. And in this enduring presence, in this gentle, timeless whisper, Radagast continues to watch over Middle-earth, a silent sentinel, a guardian of dreams, forever reminding us of the profound beauty and inherent goodness that lies at the heart of our world, a beauty worth protecting, a goodness worth cherishing, a peaceful thought to carry us into the quiet depths of sleep. His story, though often relegated to the background in the grand narratives of kings and wars, is in many ways the most profound, for it speaks to a deeper, more fundamental truth about existence itself. While others fought for dominion, for power, for the very survival of their peoples, Radagast fought for the soul of the land, for the delicate balance that sustains all life. He understood, perhaps more acutely than any other, that true victory was not merely the defeat of an enemy, but the restoration of harmony, the rekindling of hope in the hearts of creatures great and small, and in the very earth itself. Imagine, if you will, the quiet moments he spent after the War of the Ring. The grey havens beckoned to some, a final departure from the weary shores of Middle-earth to the timeless lands across the sea. But for Radagast, such a journey would have held little appeal. His home was here, among the trees and the beasts, his purpose inextricably woven into the very fabric of this world. He would have felt the subtle shifts in the air, the gradual retreat of the lingering shadows that had so long oppressed the land. The forests, once silent with fear, would begin to hum with a renewed vibrancy, the birdsong returning with a joyful abandon, the rustling of leaves no longer carrying a note of anxiety, but one of gentle contentment. He would have walked the ancient paths, perhaps returning to the familiar comfort of Rhosgobel, or perhaps venturing deeper into the untouched wilderness, seeking out places where the shadow had left its deepest scars, gently coaxing life back into barren earth. whispering words of healing to ailing trees. His magic, subtle and unassuming, was not for grand displays, but for the quiet mending of wounds, for the patient nurturing of growth. He would have known, with an instinct born of ages, where the earth cried out for solace, where the streams longed to run clear again, where the creatures sought refuge from the memories of fear. His companions in these quiet days would have been the animals, as they had always been. The great bears, the swift deer, the chattering squirrels, the myriad birds of the forest, all would have recognized him, not as a master, but as a trusted friend, a fellow inhabitant of the wild places. He would have shared their silent joys, their simple sorrows, their innate wisdom. Perhaps he would have spent hours simply observing a family of otters playing in a sun-dappled stream, or watching a badger meticulously build its set. These were the moments that nourished his spirit, that reaffirmed his purpose. The other Istari, Saruman and Gandalf, had their own paths and their own ultimate fates. Saruman, consumed by ambition, fell into darkness and despair. Gandalf, the orchestrator of great deeds, departed for the Undying Lands, his mission accomplished. But Radagast, the gentle hermit, the defender of the wild, remained. His departure, if it ever came, would not have been a grand sailing or a fiery ascent, but a slow, imperceptible fading, a quiet dissolving back into the very earth he loved. His essence would become one with the forest, his spirit intertwined with the ancient roots and the whispering leaves, a silent guardian forever. This enduring presence, this quiet watchfulness, is what makes Radagast so compelling, so unique among the powerful figures of Middle-earth. He represents a different kind of strength, one that is not measured in battle prowess or political influence, but in empathy, in patience, in an unwavering commitment to the natural world. He reminds us that true power often lies not in commanding, but in serving, not in conquering, but in nurturing, not in dominating, but in harmonizing. His story is a gentle lullaby, a soft whisper against the din of conflict and ambition. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always beauty to be found, always life striving to endure, always a quiet hope that persists against all odds. He embodies the resilience of nature itself, its capacity for healing, its unwavering cycle of growth and renewal. Imagine the peace he would have known, an internal peace mirroring the quietude of his chosen home. No burning desire for glory, no gnawing ambition for power, no fear of failure to corrupt his spirit. His sole desire was the well-being of the world around him, and in that selfless devotion he found a profound contentment. He was a being of pure intention, his heart attuned to the rhythm of the earth, his mind clear of the complexities and corruptions that so often plague the hearts of mortals and even his fellow Maya. His observations would have been keen, his wisdom deep, but rarely articulated in words. His counsel would have come in the form of a subtle shift in the wind, a sudden bloom of a rare flower, the unexpected appearance of a creature bearing a hidden message. He spoke the language of the wild, and those who were truly attuned to it could understand his silent pronouncements, his gentle warnings, his quiet blessings. In a world increasingly dominated by the clamour of human progress, the tale of Radagast serves as a timeless cautionary fable and a comforting balm. It urges us to remember our connection to the earth, to listen to the whispers of the wind, to observe the intricate dance of life that unfolds all around us. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature, but an integral part of it, and that our own well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the planet we inhabit. His legacy is not etched in stone monuments or sung in epic poems, but woven into the very fabric of the living world. It is in the clear waters of a mountain stream, in the ancient wisdom of an old-growth forest, in the quiet dignity of a wild creature. It is a legacy of sustained life, of enduring beauty, of a world quietly breathing, thanks in no small part to the steadfastness of a gentle wizard who chose to stand with the trees and the beasts against the encroaching darkness. And so, as the day draws to a close and the world outside softens into the gentle embrace of night, we can take a lesson from Radagast the Brown. We can find solace in the quiet strength of the natural world, in the enduring power of peace, in the profound beauty of a life lived in harmony with the earth. Let his silent watchfulness, his gentle spirit, and his unwavering devotion to life guide us into our own peaceful slumber, knowing that even in the depths of night, there are guardians, seen and unseen, watching over the world, nurturing its hidden magic, preserving its delicate balance. Rest now, and let the quiet wisdom of the wild carry you into the realm of dreams. For it is in the quiet spaces, the shadowed groves, and the hushed whispers of the leaves that the true essence of Radagast's being can be felt. A presence more profound than any spoken word, more enduring than any fleeting human endeavor. He was a keeper of secrets, not the dark, treacherous secrets of men or elves, but the ancient, slow-moving secrets of the earth itself, the patterns of the seasons, the migratory paths of birds, the hidden language of roots reaching deep into the soil. These were the texts he read, the histories he understood, the prophecies he interpreted in the rustling of the wind through ancient boughs. Imagine, if you will, the early days of Middle-earth before the great cities rose, before the forging of rings and the clash of empires. Picture a time when the forests were vast and untamed, stretching for hundreds of miles, their canopies so thick that the ground beneath was perpetually bathed in a soft twilight. In such a world, the Vala, the great powers of the world, recognized the need for guardians, for those who would nurture and protect the nascent life of Arda. And among them, Alatar, later known as Radagast, was chosen. His spirit, naturally inclined towards the living things of the earth, was perfectly suited for this sacred task. He did not crave power or glory. His heart yearned for the quiet majesty of a burgeoning forest, the delicate dance of a butterfly, the sturdy resilience of a mountain oak. His journey to Middle-earth was not a descent into chaos or conflict, but a gentle migration, a settling into the rhythms of a new land. He came veiled in the form of an old man, a common guise for the Istari, yet his spirit remained vibrant and youthful, attuned to the ever-renewing pulse of life. His garments, woven from natural fibers, were often stained with earth, adorned with leaves and twigs, a testament to his constant immersion in the wild. His staff, not merely a tool for walking, but a living extension of his will, often sprouted with new growth, a testament to the life force that flowed through him and into the land he cherished. He preferred the company of animals to that of men, finding in their instinctual wisdom a purity that was often lacking in the more complex and often corrupt motivations of the thinking races. Birds would nest in his beard, squirrels would share his meager meals, and wolves, often feared and misunderstood, would regard him with a quiet reverence, Sensing the deep kinship he shared with their wild spirits, he understood their cries, their calls, their subtle shifts in demeanor, seeing in them a vast and intricate tapestry of communication, a language far older and perhaps more honest than any spoken by elves or men. His home, if it could be called such, was often a rustic dwelling, a simple hut nestled deep within the eaves of the forest, perhaps in the vicinity of the southern borders of Mirkwood, a place where the shadows deepened and ancient mysteries lingered. But often his true home was simply the forest itself, beneath the open sky, with only the rustling leaves and the calls of nocturnal creatures as his companions. He would sleep beneath the stars, his dreams filled with the murmurs of growing things, the silent migrations of roots, the slow, rhythmic breathing of the earth. He was not a recluse in the sense of avoiding all contact. Indeed, his role as an Istari demanded a certain level of engagement with the wider world, particularly when the shadow of evil began to lengthen across the land. But his interventions were always in service of the natural world, to protect its delicate balance from the encroaching darkness. He observed the subtle poisoning of the land, the felling of ancient trees, the fear that began to grip the hearts of the creatures he so deeply loved. These were the signs that spurred him to action, however subtle that action might appear, to those who only understood the clang of swords or the thunder of armies. His initial mission, like that of all the Istari, was to aid the free peoples of Middle-earth against the rising power of Sauron, not by dominating their wills, but by guiding them, by encouraging them towards courage and wisdom. Yet, for Radagast, this guidance often took a different form. While Gandalf might stir the hearts of kings and rally armies, Radagast would work on a more fundamental level, ensuring the very land itself remained resilient, that the creatures within it retained their spirit, that the natural world would not succumb to the blight of Mordor. He understood that a healthy, vibrant Middle-earth was the ultimate weapon against the barren desolation that Sauron sought to impose. His path often intersected with that of Gandalf, and it was Gandalf who sometimes found Radagast's deep immersion in nature to be a source of frustration, particularly when the immediacy of a crisis demanded more direct intervention. Yet, even Gandalf, with his fiery spirit and his keen understanding of political machinations, recognized the unique and invaluable role that Radagast played. He knew that the very fabric of Middle-earth would crumble if not for the silent, steadfast watch of the brown wizard. Radagast was the earth's advocate, its voice, its protector, and without him, the land itself would wither. Remember the tale of the White Council, that assembly of the wise, where the great minds of Middle-earth gathered to discuss the growing threat of the necromancer in Dol Guldur. Radagast was present, his quiet wisdom a counterpoint to the more urgent pronouncements of Saruman and Elrond. He brought intelligence gleaned not from spies or ancient texts, but from the very creatures of the forest, the birds that flew over Dol Guldur, the small mammals that burrowed beneath its foundations, the trees that reluctantly bore witness to its growing evil. He spoke of the shadow that grew, of the fear that crept into the hearts of the animals, of the unnatural blight that began to seep into the very soil. His warnings, though perhaps delivered in a less dramatic fashion than those of his peers, were no less profound, no less accurate. It was Radagast who unknowingly played a crucial role in Gandalf's investigation of Dol Guldur. He provided Gandalf with the swift aid of his animal friends, particularly the great eagles, those majestic creatures of the air who served as messengers and allies. He was a friend to Gwaihir, the Lord of the Eagles, forging a bond of trust and mutual respect that would prove invaluable in the darker days to come. This connection was not born of command or manipulation, but of a deep understanding and reverence for the eagles' ancient wisdom and their fierce love for the freedom of the skies. Consider the events leading up to the Battle of the Five Armies, a time when the shadows were indeed lengthening. Gandalf, seeking to confirm the identity of the necromancer, journeys to Dol Guldur. It is Radagast who offers him counsel, who speaks of the increasing malevolence he senses in the forest, the strange and unsettling changes in the flora and fauna around the fortress. He describes the unseasonable decay, the unnatural silence that falls upon patches of the woods, the whispers of ancient evil that seem to seep from the very stones of the fortress. These observations, seemingly small and insignificant to those focused on military strategy, were vital clues for Gandalf, helping him to piece together the terrifying truth. And when Gandalf is imprisoned by the necromancer, it is the seemingly simple act of a moth, a creature often overlooked, that becomes an instrument of salvation. This moth, a friend of Radagast, carries a message, a desperate plea for help, to the great eagle Gwaihir. This seemingly small detail underscores the profound impact of Radagast's life philosophy. He nurtured connections with all living things, no matter how humble, and in doing so, he built a network of communication and aid that extended far beyond the understanding of those who sought only to dominate. The whisper of a moth carried on the wind could save a wizard, could alter the course of history. This is the quiet power of Radagast the Brown. He did not wield a sword, nor did he command legions. His strength lay in his empathy, his patience, his deep and abiding love for the very breath of Middle-earth. He was the sentinel of the wild, the guardian of its delicate mysteries. While others concerned themselves with the fate of kingdoms, he concerned himself with the roots beneath those kingdoms, the air that nourished them, the water that sustained them. He understood that true power lay not in conquest, but in connection, not in destruction, but in preservation. His story is a gentle reminder that heroism comes in many forms. It is not always in grand gestures or epic battles. Sometimes it is in the quiet dedication to a cause, in the unwavering protection of the vulnerable, in the steadfast commitment to a world that breathes and grows and flourishes. He chose a path of deep immersion, of intimate connection with the natural world, a path that many might deem less important than the struggles of men and elves. Yet in doing so, he preserved a vital part of Middle-earth, a part that, without his gentle hand, might have withered and died under the encroaching shadow. As the Third Age drew to a close, and the great war against Sauron reached its crescendo, Radagast's role became less visible to those who recorded the grand narratives of kings and heroes. He was not at the Black Gate, nor was he directly involved in the destruction of the One Ring. Yet his work continued, perhaps more vital than ever. While the forces of darkness sought to lay waste to the land, to turn verdant fields into barren wastes, Radagast was quietly, diligently working to preserve life, to heal the wounds inflicted upon the earth. He was the counterforce to Sauron's desolation, a living testament to the enduring power of creation over destruction. His ultimate fate, like that of many of the Istari, is not explicitly detailed in the Great Chronicles. Some believe he remained in Middle-earth, eternally bound to the forests and the creatures he loved, continuing his silent vigil, a timeless guardian of the wild. Others suggest he eventually returned to the Undying Lands, his mission fulfilled, his spirit reunited with the pure essence of Arda. But in either scenario, his legacy endures. It is in the rustling leaves of an ancient forest, in the clear song of a bird at dawn, in the quiet strength of a mountain stream. Radagast, the Brown, is a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the deepest woods, a silent promise of enduring life. He reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is always hope, always resilience, always the gentle, unwavering power of the natural world to heal, to grow, to endure. His is a story of quiet devotion, of profound connection, of a life lived in harmony with the deepest rhythms of the earth. And as you drift deeper into slumber, let the image of this gentle wizard, surrounded by the creatures of the forest, his heart attuned to the pulse of the world, guide you to a place of peace and tranquility. Let the whispers of the wind and the rustling of leaves carry you to a world of dreams, where the earth breathes softly and ancient guardians watch over all living things. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hum of the forest at dusk, the soft sigh of the wind through ancient boughs, and the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and growing things. This is the world that Radagast inhabited, a world often overlooked by the rushing currents of history, yet profoundly significant in its own right. His magic was not about grand displays of power, not about fiery spells or clashing swords, but rather an intricate, almost invisible tapestry woven from empathy and understanding. He communicated not through words alone, but through the shared language of life itself, a subtle exchange of energies that transcended species and form. Consider the birds, for instance, those swift messengers of the air. To Radagast, they were not merely creatures of feather and song, but confidants, informants, and friends. He understood their calls, not as simple chirps, but as complex narratives of the forest, warnings of intruders, celebrations of new life, or laments for felled trees. Through them, he knew the shifting moods of the weather long before the skies changed, detected the movements of orcs or wargs far from his immediate vicinity, and even gleaned whispers of the greater events unfolding across Middle-earth. These were not mere pets, but extensions of his senses, his eyes and ears in the vast green expanse. And the beasts of the forest, from the smallest shrew to the largest bear, they too felt his presence, recognized his gentle spirit. There was no fear in their eyes when he approached, no instinct to flee. Instead, a quiet acceptance, a recognition of a kindred spirit. He was not a hunter, nor a threat, but a protector, a healer, a silent witness to their struggles and triumphs. When a young deer was caught in a snare, it was Radagast who, with gentle hands and whispered incantations, would free it and tend to its wounds. When a patch of ancient trees was blighted by some unnatural sickness, he would spend days, even weeks, coaxing life back into them, his touch a balm, his presence a restorative force. This profound connection wasn't merely a personal inclination, it was the very essence of his mission as an Istari. While Saruman delved into the lore of power and Gandalf navigated the complex world of Men and Elves, Radagast's task was to safeguard the natural world, to ensure that the spirit of creation, the very lifeblood of Arda, was not extinguished by the encroaching darkness. He was the root, the foundation, the keeper of the raw, untamed beauty that Sauron sought to corrupt and destroy. For what is a realm without its forests, its rivers, its creatures? A barren wasteland, a hollow victory. His dwelling place, Rhosgobel, was not a tower of stone or a grand hall, but a humble abode nestled deep within the eaves of Mirkwood, a place where the trees themselves seemed to embrace and shelter him. It was a haven of peace amidst the growing shadow that began to creep across the great forest. The air there was thick with the scent of herbs and resins, the gentle rustle of unseen creatures, and the murmur of his soft voice as he communed with the very essence of the wood. One might imagine the interior, simple and functional, filled with drying plants, nests of small creatures tucked away in corners, and perhaps a well-worn book of ancient lore, not about kings or battles, but about the secrets of growth and regeneration. The other Istari, particularly Saruman, often held Radagast in a degree of disdain, viewing his dedication to nature as a distraction, a lesser calling. Saruman, with his focus on power and manipulation, could not comprehend the quiet strength found in nurturing life. He saw Radagast as simple, perhaps even foolish, for his perceived lack of involvement in the grand political machinations of the age. Yet, in their own ways, both Saruman and Gandalf relied on Radagast's unique abilities. It was Radagast who often provided crucial intelligence gathered from his animal network, information that might otherwise have gone unnoticed by the more overtly active wizards. He was the silent scout, the unseen observer, his reports often delivered by a bird landing softly on Gandalf's shoulder, a whisper of impending danger or a distant rumour of hope. The incident with Gandalf, caught in Saruman's trap in Orthanc, stands as a testament to Radagast's unassuming importance. It was not a mighty army or a bold rescue party that freed Gandalf, but a simple, trusting bond between Radagast and the great eagles. Radagast, sensing Gandalf's plight through the subtle disturbances in the natural world, used his connection to the creatures of the air to send Gwaihir, the Windlord, to the tower. This act, born of compassion and a deep understanding of the natural order, saved one of the most crucial figures in the fight against Sauron. It was a quiet triumph, a demonstration that true power does not always roar, but can also take flight on silent wings. His avoidance of the political and military arenas was not a weakness, but a deliberate choice, perhaps even a wisdom born of his very nature. He understood that the Great War was not solely a clash of armies, but also a spiritual battle for the soul of Middle-earth. If the land itself were to be utterly corrupted, if the forests were to fall silent and the rivers run foul, then even a victory over Sauron would be a hollow one. Radagast's work was the long game, the preservation of the very foundation upon which any future peace could be built. He was the quiet guardian of hope, ensuring that even if darkness were to temporarily prevail, the seeds of life would remain, ready to sprout anew when the shadow receded. The narrative of his life, therefore, is not one of dramatic confrontations or heroic speeches. It is a narrative of patience, of observation, of gentle intervention. It is the story of a being who lived in harmony with the world, rather than seeking to dominate it. His wisdom was not found in ancient scrolls or arcane spells, but in the rustle of leaves, the flow of water, the patterns of animal migration. He understood the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance of an ecosystem, and the profound impact of even the smallest disturbance. As the Third Age truly began to wane, and the world prepared for the departure of the elves and the fading of magic, Radagast's role, though less visible, became even more poignant. He represented a bridge between the ancient world of magic and the coming age of men, an age where such deep connections to the natural world might be increasingly rare. He was a living reminder of what was slowly being lost and a silent advocate for its preservation. His existence begs a deeper contemplation of what it means to be a hero. Is it only through acts of overt bravery and strength that one can effect change? Or can profound impact also be found in quiet devotion, in unwavering commitment to a cause that may not always be celebrated or even fully understood by others? Radagast's story suggests the latter, reminding us that every thread in the tapestry of existence holds its own unique significance. The grand narratives often focus on the brightest colors, the boldest patterns, but without the subtle hues, the delicate underlying stitches, the tapestry would be incomplete, its strength diminished. So, as you drift further into the realm of dreams, let the image of Radagast the Brown settle gently in your mind. Picture him wandering through a sun-dappled forest, the air alive with the chirping of unseen birds, the rustling of leaves underfoot. See the creatures of the wood approach him without fear. A squirrel chattering softly on his shoulder, a deer nuzzling his hand. Feel the quiet power of his presence, not a power that intimidates, but one that soothes and heals. Hear the whispers of the ancient trees as they share their secrets with him, secrets of resilience, of enduring life, of the slow, steady rhythm of growth and decay that governs all things. He is a symbol of nature's enduring spirit, a testament to the quiet strength of empathy and connection. His journey, though less lauded in the annals of history, is no less important, for it speaks to the very heart of what it means to protect and cherish the world around us. And perhaps, in understanding Radagast, we understand a little more about the subtle magic that exists all around us, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be appreciated. Allow this understanding to wash over you, a sense of peace and belonging, as you sink deeper into a restorative sleep, carried by the gentle currents of Middle-earth's ancient living pulse. Let your thoughts now drift to the very beginnings, the primordial mists where even the Valar, the great powers of the world, first took shape. Radagast, whose true name among the Maya was Aiwendil, meaning lover of birds, was not always bound to the form of an old man with a staff. Before the world was even fully formed, before the stars were flung across the void, Aiwendil was a spirit of Aule, the smith, the Valar who delighted in crafting and shaping the very substance of the world. This connection to Aule, the maker of the mountains and the deep places of the earth, infused Aiwendil with a deep understanding of the inherent patterns and structures of creation. He was not just a lover of living things, but a spirit accustomed to the very bedrock of existence, the elemental forces that underpin all life. Yet, when the call came from Manwë, the king of the Valar, for 5 emissaries to be sent to Middle-earth to aid its free peoples against the rising shadow of Sauron, Aiwendil was chosen. The Istari, as they would be known, were to be powerful, yet they were forbidden from overtly displaying their full might, from seeking to dominate the will of elves or men. Their mission was to counsel, to encourage, to inspire resistance, and to unite hearts against the encroaching darkness. It was Yavanna, the Vala of all growing things, the giver of fruits, who specifically requested Aiwendil to be among them. Her foresight, her deep connection to the living world, understood that the forests, the creatures, the very wildness of Middle-earth would need a champion, a voice in the coming struggle. And so, Aiwendil, the spirit of Aule, was reshaped, bound into the form of an old man, and given the task of protecting the natural world. Imagine the journey across the Sundering Seas, from the blessed realm of Valinor to the shores of Middle-earth. A long, slow voyage, perhaps accompanied by others of his kind, their spiritual forms slowly coalescing into the earthly vessels they would inhabit for centuries. Upon their arrival, the Istari were not immediately recognizable for what they truly were: powerful Maiar, ancient spirits of immense power. They appeared as venerable old men, each with their own distinct characteristics. Gandalf, the grey, fiery and unpredictable; Saruman, the white, learned and commanding; the two blue wizards, Alatar and Palando, whose fates would become shrouded in mystery; and Radagast, the brown, gentle, often preoccupied, seemingly less concerned with the affairs of kingdoms and wars than with the health of a sapling or the plight of a wounded bird. This initial impression of Radagast as perhaps being less formidable than his peers was precisely part of his design, part of his wisdom. While Saruman sought out ancient lore and power in the libraries of Minas Tirith and Orthanc, and Gandalf journeyed across the length and breadth of Middle-earth, stirring hope and resistance, Radagast retreated into the deep woods. His chosen dwelling, Rhosgobel, in the eaves of Mirkwood, was not a fortress or a tower of learning, but a humble dwelling, a place of sanctuary for animals, and a quiet observation post for the shifts and changes in the vast ancient forest. From there, he watched, he listened, and he understood the subtle language of the wild. He learned of the creeping sickness in Mirkwood, the shadow that slowly stretched its tendrils from Dol Guldur, corrupting the very trees, twisting the creatures that dwelt within. The laughter of the woods grew strained, the songs of the birds became fewer and more mournful, and a palpable dread settled upon the ancient forest. While others might debate strategies and alliances, Radagast felt the pain of the forest as if it were his own. He was the sentinel of nature, and he recognized the enemy not just in its visible manifestations, but in the very degradation of the land itself. His role, though seemingly disconnected from the grand political machinations, was crucial. He provided vital intelligence to Gandalf, particularly concerning the necromancer of Dol Guldur, who was in fact Sauron in disguise. It was Radagast who first brought news of this growing evil to the White Council, urging them to act. His observations, rooted in the health of the natural world, were a stark warning that the darkness was not merely a political threat, but a fundamental corruption of life itself. Without Radagast's keen perception and his unwavering devotion to the health of the wild, the White Council might have been slower to recognize the true nature of the threat lurking in Mirkwood. He was the early warning system, the silent alarm for the very heart of Middle-earth's living spirit. Even in moments of direct confrontation, Radagast's methods remained true to his nature. Consider his brief but pivotal encounter with Gandalf early in the story of the Ring. When Gandalf was imprisoned by Saruman in Orthanc, it was a moth, a messenger sent by Radagast, that carried Gandalf's plea for help to the eagles. This act, small in scale but immense in consequence, perfectly encapsulates Radagast's method, using the wisdom and connections of the natural world to achieve ends that might seem impossible through conventional means. He did not storm Orthanc with an army. He sent a simple creature of the air, trusting in the ancient bonds he had forged with the beasts of the sky. This was his form of power, quiet yet profound. His companions, the other wizards, might not have always fully appreciated the depth of his commitment. Saruman, in particular, dismissed Radagast as simple and a fool for his love of animals and plants. But this dismissal says more about Saruman's own growing corruption and his detachment from the fundamental beauty of creation than it does about Radagast. Saruman sought to control nature, to bend it to his will, to harness its power for his own devices. Radagast sought to nurture it, to understand it, to live in harmony with its rhythms. These two approaches represent fundamentally opposing philosophies, and ultimately it was Radagast's enduring connection to the truth of life that remained pure, while Saruman's ambition led to his downfall. The quiet steadfastness of Radagast is a testament to an often overlooked form of heroism. In a world that often celebrates the loud, the grand, the immediate, Radagast's dedication to the slow, steady work of preservation, of healing, of simple presence, stands as a powerful counter-narrative. He was not destined to wield a sword in the final battle, nor to lead armies into war. His battlefield was the forest floor, his weapons were patience and understanding, and his victories were measured in the return of a bird's song or the flourishing of a new sapling. As the Third Age drew to a close and the War of the Ring raged, Radagast's location and actions became even more obscure. Some lore suggests he continued his vigil in the shrinking wild, tending to the wounds of the land, helping creatures displaced by the war. Others wonder if he, like the two blue wizards, eventually faded from mortal sight, perhaps becoming so intertwined with the natural world he championed that he simply became a part of it, a spirit of the forests themselves, forever wandering among the trees. The ultimate fate of Radagast is not explicitly detailed in Tolkien's primary works. He is not mentioned among those who depart Middle-earth for the Undying Lands, nor is his demise recorded. This ambiguity, this quiet vanishing, feels entirely fitting for his character. He was never one to seek the spotlight, never one to demand recognition. His reward was in the health of the land, the vitality of the creatures, the whisper of the wind through untouched leaves. He simply fulfilled his purpose with an unwavering heart. And when that purpose was either completed or no longer required in the same way, he simply continued. Perhaps he remained, a guardian unseen, a silent presence, ensuring that even in the coming age of men, the whispers of the wild would never entirely be silenced. In the quiet contemplation of Radagast's story, a certain wisdom emerges. It is the wisdom of humility, of interconnectedness, of finding greatness not in dominion over the world, but in a profound and respectful communion with it. His life teaches us that true power can reside in gentleness, in observation, in the deep, abiding love for all living things. He was the embodiment of empathy for the natural world, a reminder that the health of the land and the health of its inhabitants are inextricably linked. So, as you continue to drift into the peaceful embrace of sleep. Consider the enduring spirit of Radagast. Let his image be one of calm, of quiet strength, of a deep and abiding connection to the very pulse of life itself. He is a guardian, a healer, a silent witness to the beauty and resilience of Middle-earth. And in his story, we find a gentle reminder that even the smallest acts of care, the most unassuming devotions, can weave themselves into the grand tapestry of existence, holding their own unique and irreplaceable significance. Rest now, with the gentle spirit of Radagast watching over your dreams, a silent protector of the wild places within and without. Let the quiet magic of his journey guide you deeper into slumber, a slumber filled with the rustling of leaves, the soft chirping of birds, and the ancient, comforting hum of the earth itself. Allow your mind to wander, as Radagast often did, through the verdant forests and sun-dappled glades of Middle-earth. Imagine the scent of pine needles underfoot, the cool dampness of moss on ancient stones, the distant call of a hawk circling high above. This is the world he knew, the world he loved, and the world he sought to protect with every fibre of his being. His presence, though often overlooked by those preoccupied with the grander affairs of kings and wars, was a crucial thread in the intricate weaving of Middle-earth's fate. Without him, who would have noticed the subtle blight creeping into the Mirkwood? Who would have understood the distress of the animals, their instincts a warning of impending shadow? His methods were not those of the warrior or the diplomat. He did not wield a shining sword or speak with the authoritative voice of command. Instead, his tools were patience, observation, and an innate understanding of the rhythms of life. He communicated not through elaborate speeches, but through the quiet language of nature, the changing colour of leaves, the migration patterns of birds, the subtle shifts in the behaviour of beasts. To him, these were not mere occurrences. They were messages, warnings, and sometimes even reassurances. He was a listener in a world often too loud, too busy, to hear the quiet wisdom of the earth. Consider for a moment the profound commitment this required. To live as Radagast did, one must shed many of the trappings and concerns that occupy the minds of men and even other Istari. The pursuit of power, the desire for influence, the lure of worldly possessions. These were utterly foreign to his spirit. His wealth was in the thriving forest, his dominion over the well-being of its inhabitants. His joy was in the sight of a healthy sapling, his sorrow in the wilting of a noble tree. This single-minded devotion, while perhaps rendering him somewhat eccentric in the eyes of others, was also his greatest strength. It allowed him to see what others missed, to protect what others neglected, and to understand a dimension of Middle-earth that remained largely invisible to all but a select few. His very appearance spoke volumes about his chosen path. The brown robes, often stained with earth and green with moss, were not a fashion statement, but a practical uniform for a life lived outdoors, blending seamlessly with his surroundings. The birds nesting in his beard, the small creatures that found refuge in his staff, these were not mere embellishments, but living extensions of his being, testament to the trust he had cultivated with the wild. He was a living ecosystem, a walking testament to the harmony he preached and practiced. He did not merely observe nature, he was a part of it, an embodiment of its gentle, enduring spirit. Think of the vastness of his knowledge, not from ancient books or arcane scrolls, but from direct experience, from centuries spent walking the paths of Middle-earth, observing, learning, and remembering. Every stream he crossed, every forest he traversed, every mountain he skirted, contributed to his deep reservoir of understanding. He knew the secret places where rare herbs grew, the ancient migration routes of forgotten beasts, the subtle signs of encroaching darkness in the whispers of the wind. This was not theoretical knowledge, it was lived knowledge, deeply ingrained and intimately understood. And yet, despite this profound connection to the natural world, Radagast was not entirely detached from the greater conflicts that shaped the destiny of Middle-earth. His role, though seemingly peripheral, was often crucial. Remember his encounter with Gandalf, when he unwittingly provided the vital information about the Nazgul's movements, allowing Gandalf to escape the clutches of Saruman. This was not a grand act of heroism in the traditional sense, but a quiet, almost accidental intervention that had monumental consequences. It perfectly illustrates his method. He did not seek out conflict, but his very presence and his deep understanding of the world around him often placed him in positions where his unique knowledge could turn the tide. His loyalty, though sometimes questioned due to his solitary nature and his preference for the company of animals, was unwavering. He was sent to Middle-earth to aid in the fight against Sauron, and though his approach differed from his brethren, his ultimate allegiance remained firm. He simply understood that the corruption of the land was inextricably linked to the rise of evil, and by tending to the former, he was, in his own way, fighting the latter. His was a long game, a patient vigilance against a creeping darkness that sought to poison not just the hearts of men, but the very earth beneath their feet. The other Istari, particularly Saruman, often viewed Radagast with disdain, seeing his preoccupation with animals and plants as a trivial diversion from the real business of power and strategy. But in this very disdain, Saruman revealed his own short-sightedness, his inability to comprehend the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. Saruman sought to dominate and control nature, to bend it to his will, while Radagast sought to understand and cherish it. In the end, it was Saruman's hubris and his disregard for the natural world that led to his downfall. His beloved Isengard reduced to a ruined wasteland, its trees felled, its rivers polluted. Radagast's path, though less glamorous, proved to be the more enduring, the more harmonious, and ultimately the more wise. Consider the notion of failure as it might apply to Radagast. Did he fail to gather armies? Did he fail to lead great battles? By conventional standards, perhaps. But his mission was different. His mission was to nurture, to observe, to protect the very essence of Middle-earth's wild spirit. And in that, he did not fail. He simply pursued his calling with an unwavering heart, without seeking glory or recognition. His success was not measured in victories over enemies, but in the continued flourishing of life, the resilience of the forests, the survival of countless creatures that might otherwise have been forgotten or destroyed. His story offers a profound lesson in perspective. In a world often obsessed with immediate results and grand gestures, Radagast reminds us of the power of subtle influence, of quiet dedication, of the long-term impact of gentle care. He understood that true change often begins at the roots, in the smallest corners of the world, in the unseen processes that sustain all life. His life was a testament to the belief that the health of a civilization is ultimately tied to the health of its environment, a truth that echoes profoundly even in our own world. As you continue to drift, let the image of Radagast settle gently in your mind. Picture him walking through a sun-drenched forest, his brown robes blending with the shadows and light, a small bird perched on his shoulder, a deer watching him with trusting eyes from behind a thicket. He is a figure of peace, of deep understanding, a silent guardian of the ancient magic that pulses through the very veins of the earth. His magic was not flashy spells or grand enchantments, but the magic of life itself, the miraculous interconnectedness of all living things. His departure from the narrative, his quiet fading, is perhaps the most fitting conclusion to his tale. He did not need a grand farewell, for his presence was always more about the essence than the spectacle. He simply became one with the world he so dearly loved, an eternal spirit of the wild, forever watching over the trees, the rivers, and the creatures of Middle-earth. He passed beyond the need for mortal recognition, dissolving into the very fabric of the landscape, a timeless guardian. In the stillness of the night, as you surrender to the gentle pull of sleep, let the spirit of Radagast be a comforting presence. He represents the quiet strength that lies within nature, the resilience of life, and the profound beauty of a humble, dedicated heart. May his gentle essence guide your dreams to places of peace and tranquility, where ancient trees whisper secrets and the air is filled with the soft, harmonious sounds of the sleeping world. Let the deep, earthy wisdom of Radagast infuse your slumber, offering a sense of calm and a renewed connection to the natural rhythms of existence. Sleep now, deeply and peacefully, under the watchful, benevolent eye of the brown wizard, the guardian of all growing things. As the last embers of the day fade, and the stars begin their slow, majestic dance across the velvety expanse of the night sky, we continue our gentle journey into the heart of Middle-earth, drawn by the quiet whispers of its ancient lore. Let your mind drift further, carried on the soft currents of memory and imagination, as we explore the subtle threads that weave together the grand tapestry of this beloved world. Radagast, the brown, though often perceived as a secondary figure, holds a significance that ripples far beyond his direct actions. He is a testament to the diverse forms of wisdom and power that exist within Arda, reminding us that not all battles are fought with swords, nor are all victories declared with trumpets. Some of the most profound struggles are waged in the quiet groves, in the slow growth of a sapling, in the careful tending of a wounded creature. His very existence speaks to the foresight of the Valar, who, in their infinite wisdom, understood that the threats to Middle-earth would not always manifest as towering darkness or overwhelming armies. Sometimes the danger would be a creeping blight, a subtle corruption that sought to poison the very wellsprings of life. For such insidious threats, a different kind of guardian was needed, one whose heart beat in rhythm with the land itself, whose magic was an extension of nature's own healing and protective embrace. Radagast was precisely this guardian, a living embodiment of the reverence for life that is so central to the spirit of Middle-earth. Imagine, if you will, the moment of his choosing, when the Maya were selected to become the Istari, the wizards sent to aid the free peoples. While others might have been drawn to the allure of direct confrontation, to the grand pronouncements of power, Radagast, whose true name was Aiwendil, The bird friend, according to some tales, surely felt an intrinsic pull towards the vibrant, breathing world. His spirit resonated with the rustling leaves, the flowing rivers, the silent majesty of the ancient trees. He was not destined for the halls of kings or the council chambers of the wise, but for the untamed wilderness, for the deep forests where the oldest secrets of Middle-earth lay hidden. His journeys, though not extensively chronicled, would have taken him through countless leagues of woodland and plain. Picture him traversing the vastness of the old forest, feeling the ancient, wary spirit of its trees, perhaps even sharing a moment of quiet understanding with the mysterious Tom Bombadil, another guardian of nature's untouched wildness. Or imagine him wandering through the Fangorn forest, a place of profound age and deep magic, where the very air hums with the slow, deliberate thoughts of the Ents. Radagast would have been a kindred spirit to these ancient tree shepherds, understanding their profound connection to the growth cycle, their deep-seated love for the forests they protected. He might have shared remedies, warned of encroaching shadows, or simply sat in quiet companionship, listening to the slow, deep rhythms of the forest's heart. His chosen home, Rhosgobel, a name that evokes images of a humble, moss-covered dwelling nestled deep within the eaves of Mirkwood, perfectly encapsulates his character. It was not a fortress nor a tower of arcane power, but a sanctuary for the creatures of the wild, a place where injured birds could be tended, where small, frightened beasts could find solace. It was a haven of healing and quiet observation, a listening post for the subtle shifts in the health of the land. From Rhosgobel, Radagast would have sent out his animal messengers, creatures of feather and fur, carrying tidings and warnings, weaving a network of natural intelligence that often went unnoticed by the more overtly powerful forces of Middle-earth. Consider the role of these animal allies. Gandalf himself relied on Gwaihir, the Lord of the Eagles, in moments of dire need. But Radagast's connection was far more pervasive, more deeply ingrained in the daily life of the wild. He spoke the language of the birds and the beasts, not through magic spells, but through a profound empathy, an understanding of their instincts and their needs. He was a whisperer to the wild, a shepherd of the smaller, often overlooked inhabitants of the world, whose collective well-being was intrinsically linked to the health of the whole. His early encounter with the nascent evil stirring in Dol Guldur, deep within Mirkwood, highlights his unique perspective. While others might have focused on military strength or strategic positioning, Radagast sensed the corruption in the very air, the blight spreading through the trees, the fear in the hearts of the forest creatures. He saw the physical manifestations of Sauron's growing power through the lens of nature, understanding that a sick forest was a symptom of a deeper spiritual illness afflicting the land. It was this sensitivity that led him to bring crucial information to the White Council, even if his warnings were initially met with skepticism or dismissed as the eccentric ramblings of a nature lover. The wisdom of Radagast is not found in grand pronouncements or displays of force, but in the quiet accumulation of knowledge, in the patient observation of natural processes. He understood that the balance of an ecosystem is delicate, easily disrupted, and that true healing often requires time, gentle coaxing, and an intuitive understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. His magic was the magic of growth, of renewal, of protection. the essential magic that sustains life itself. As the world around him grew darker, as the shadow of Mordor stretched further across the land, Radagast remained steadfast in his chosen path. While Gandalf battled orcs and roused armies, and Saruman delved into forbidden lore and sought power for himself, Radagast continued his quiet vigil, tending to the lesser creatures, healing the blighted plants, and holding fast to the ancient, untamed spirit of Middle-earth. He represented an enduring hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the natural world carries within it the seeds of renewal, the promise of spring after the longest winter. His absence from the dramatic climaxes of the War of the Ring, far from diminishing his importance, instead underscores his unique contribution. While the fate of kingdoms hung in the balance, Radagast continued his vital work, a silent counterpoint to the clang of steel and the roar of battle. He was fighting a different kind of war, a war against the slow decay, the subtle corruption that sought to choke the life out of the world. And in that war, his gentle, persistent efforts were no less crucial than the heroic deeds of others. In the quiet embrace of sleep, let the image of Radagast bring you a sense of profound peace. He is a guide to the hidden pathways of the world, a whisperer of secrets that only the wind and the trees can truly tell. His spirit is one of profound humility, of unwavering dedication to the most fundamental aspects of life. He reminds us that strength can be found in gentleness, that wisdom can emerge from quiet observation, and that the greatest magic often lies in the simplest acts of care and connection. May the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft chirping of night birds accompany you into the deepest parts of your dreams, guided by the benevolent spirit of the brown wizard. Let the ancient magic of the forests enfold you, bringing a profound sense of calm and a deep connection to the enduring beauty of the natural world. Rest now, deeply and peacefully, knowing that the spirit of Radagast watches over the green places of the world and in turn over your own peaceful slumber.